Hello everyone, I'm Milo, and I'd like to warmly welcome you to the Creator Economy Defrag. If you haven't been here before, this podcast features high-signal conversations with industry-leading experts on the business of content creation, pulling back the curtain to keep you on the cutting edge of the industry today. The show is brought to you by Pipeline, the leading creator development platform which helps creators grow their audiences and build their businesses. To learn more about Pipeline, visit www.pipeline.gg. Today's guest is Scott Pytlik, Director of Marketing at Ascendant Studios, a brand new video game development company with lineage dating back to classics like Call of Duty and the original Dead Space. Ascendant is releasing its first game, Immortals of Aveum, on July 20th, 2023, and I was invited to preview it at EA's Redwood Shores office the day before I drove north to San Rafael to meet up with Scott at the studio. Scott has an expansive understanding of influence marketing thanks to his own history working on titles such as Borderlands and Spec Ops: The Line even back in the day. Now that he's at Ascendant, he's utilizing his experience with content over the past decade and a half to direct the studio's own efforts to actually market itself as a product, interestingly, as well as all the more traditional marketing efforts for the game. His unique approach in this area is really fascinating, and I hope you enjoy the conversation just as much as I did. So Scott, it's really nice to be here, first of all. It is a pleasure. The studio is wonderful. It's my first time being in a studio in maybe 5 years or something.
Yeah.
Just because of the pandemic.
Yeah,
and
pre-pandemic.
yeah, it's great to be back in person, and doing an in-person event as well is something that is a rare occurrence these days.
Yes.
So makes me happy that that's managed to happen. So the place I'd like to begin is in the background of your history and your career and where all of your learnings over the years have come from, so that we can see the sort of catalysts for the stuff that you've learned and the stuff that you've been applying, learn the philosophies behind some of those sorts of things as you've picked up that experience over the years, and then see how you're employing all of those learnings and implementing it with the game Immortals of Aveum.
Totally.
So first off, I have to go back to, and I trolled your LinkedIn for this, you worked at Access Communications in sort of 2010 kind of time and handled a bunch of different games as, what was your role back then? You would...
Yeah, back then I was starting out in my PR career, which was sort of a second career for me. And I was, I think my title was PR coordinator or PR executive, something like that. So I was pretty entry level at that point, but doing, as most people do in an agency, it's like you just work till the work is done. So you got a lot of, what was amazing about Access Communications back in the day is you could take on more responsibility if you wanted to. And I've always been that type of ambitious person who is like going to go above and beyond because I'm interested in learning more and then applying what I'm learning and all of that. And so Access was the start for me in the games industry proper. And my career in the industry kind of started a few years before that. Like I said, this was my second career. I'm now on this is my second career. My first career out of college was journalism. I went to school for communications. I thought for sure I was going to end up in PR, but I found myself disinterested in it because the types of opportunities that were coming my way and like the internship that I had was in like the healthcare industry. And so I wasn't very passionate about what I was repping. And I found myself thinking, I don't know that I really want or can do public relations. Like maybe my heart's not in it. And it turned out my heart is in it in a huge way. I just needed to do it for the right thing. And so I've always been a big writer. A passion of mine is writing. I felt like I was pretty good. It was like one of the things I was good at in school. So in college, was like, I'm going to be a journalist. Like I was part of our school newspaper. I got a lot of enjoyment out of it. And I said, okay, I'm going to put my skills to bear in journalism. Despite the fact, my parents and other folks were like, it's going to struggle. It's going to be a struggle to make a career in journalism that pays well. And I said, well, I don't care. I'm young. I'm going to figure it out. My passion's in it. It feels like a noble profession. Our country, the United States needs more honest journalists. It's part of the reason, the fabric of democracy. So for all those reasons, I was like, all right, let's do it. So I worked for 4 years as an editor at a regional newspaper, like working in legacy media, working my way up the ranks from I worked the night shift, till like 2, 3, 4 in the morning, putting the newspaper out every day, would sleep in the morning and then would moonlight for GamePro magazine. So part of out of school was I realized I really like video games. I want to be part of video games. And I don't know absolutely anything about coding. I can't draw. Sure. I'm not a game designer. So what the heck would I ever do to get involved in games? And I realized, well, I guess I could critique games. I can write about games. Like I'm a good writer. I have so many thoughts about the games that I play. Like let me, it was like the early days of making content, actually. Like when I look back on that era of my life, blogging was early content creation.
Yep, and to be unsure exactly of where you'd fit into the process, and to see that there was this sort of burgeoning, kind of emergent industry there. Seems like we actually had a kind of similar entry into the industry. My YouTube channel, I started making that content around 2009, 2010. Like that was when things became not more serious in terms of being full-time or anything, but more serious in terms of the time invested that I put into it.
Yes.
So, and similarly, wasn't a programmer, didn't have any of those sorts of skills, but knew that there was a magnetism of the industry that was pulling me towards it. And so it's like, well, okay, where can I fit myself into it?
Totally. I moved from journalism, obviously, into public relations. At one point, I decided that my skill set was good for that. And in working at GamePro helped me transition. I met PR people that were like, oh yeah, you could do this. Like you could promote games, right? Instead of just critique games, which is what I want to be part of the process, right? I didn't want to be tearing down people's work. I wanted to be building it up and building it myself. So that was my motivating factor to take that leap backward. You know, and what I did is I leapt backwards. Access, I mean, I basically went from a decently paying middle tier kind of job, middle ranked title in a newspaper to entry level in PR because I'm like, you know what? I care about games. I want to make a career in games. I'm just gonna get my foot in the door and then I'm gonna grind. I'm gonna grind because I know I can do it and I know if I work hard, people will see that and you know I will over time take on more responsibilities. And so part of like where my journey was that drive and part of it was luck.
So you ended up at Access and one of the games that I saw that you worked on was Spec Ops: The Line.
Yes.
Which because there was a whole slate of games that you worked on while you were there.
Yes.
Spec Ops is one of my favorite games of all time. So anyone that's contributed in any way to its success is sort of a saint in my eyes. But what was that like? Do you remember much about what
I do. Yeah, no, it was that was one of my favorite campaigns, right? So like when Access hired me, they'd just taken on PlayStation as a new client, and they needed to build an entire new staff account to promote PlayStation Move at the time.
Right.
And so I was working on a bunch of PlayStation Move games, and before you know it, it was like, okay, this team's pretty good. We need help on Killzone 3. We need help on SOCOM 4. We need help on Resistance 3. So it's like, okay, cool. Now I'm working on games that are in franchises that I grew up playing that I like loved it as a kid. 2K was a client at Access. Disney Interactive. I got to work with Warren Spector on the Disney Epic Mickey game for a little bit on Wii, and then Irrational Games on BioShock Infinite. And so through that experience with Spec Ops and then Darkness 2, like as 2K as a client, they had asked me, you know, why don't you come in house? And so to answer your point about Spec Ops, that is honestly one of the biggest diamonds in the rough in this industry ever, and I still to this day love the team that worked on that. The people there at 2K and Jaeger were so passionate about what they were doing, and you know that game kind of got rebooted a couple times before it finally came out, but it did something that was different. It was art that like made a point about the horrors of war in an era when we were just, you know, gaming was full of video games that, you know, glorified war. And here was Spec Ops doing something totally different. But yeah, to work on that campaign, man, we did all kinds of crazy stuff. We filled a bus with sand at a convention at PAX. And we did interviews inside the bus. And we had a survival expert. I'll never forget this. Alex Ellis and I, she worked with me at Access. She found this like survivalist expert before doomsday prepping and survivalist was like kind of a trendy thing. Before Bear Grylls had like a TV show, I think. We found this guy who's like, yo, yeah, you know, I could tell you, you know, if you're lost, you're trapped, you're in a desert, it's sandy, it's hot, there's no resources, everything's kind of like war torn. How would you survive?
Right, amazing.
And people would come in and we would have them, you know, do interviews with media and other outlets to explain the realities of if you had to survive in Dubai when it was like under like
massive
warlords,
sandstorm.
massive sandstorm and like warlords ruling over it and stuff. Like, how would you do that in real life? It was
advice that you'd never expect to need in your life.
Yeah, totally.
It'd be useful, I guess.
Man, I love that era of 2K and I love that era of PR in my career because, again, like I said, those I kind of viewed us as like the early pioneers of content creation, and that's the kind of video that I would click on and watch on YouTube these days. But nobody else was really doing those kinds of stories, you know?
Right.
Another crazy example is like The Bureau, XCOM Declassified. Not a successful game, right? But still one of my favorite campaigns I've ever worked on. Like I feel like the marketing and the PR that we did on that game was top notch, considering we knew we kind of had a middle of the road game that, maybe if it had more time would have been stellar.
Sure.
The team that worked on that at 2K Marin, a lot of them I work with now at Ascendant Studios. We reminisce about, the things that could and couldn't have had and what the potential of that game could have been. But one of the creative things that we did was like, we found a UFO expert. I didn't know such a thing existed. And I wish I could remember the guy's name right now. I still keep in touch with him every once in a while. And Greg Miller did a great video with us at IGN on it. And he and I still joke about this, but like, he was a British UFO guy who investigated UFOs for the British government. He was effectively like real life X-Files. That was his government paid job. And he's got all kinds of like stories about actual UFOs that he swears like he investigated, and he doesn't go so far to say as I saw little green men.
Sure.
But he's like, I saw some stuff.
I saw the green man's shadow.
Yeah, like I saw some stuff and it's locked in vaults and all this stuff. So we were telling stories, about that, about the demystification or declassification, or in that case, the sort of redaction of highly sensitive material, because that was a big theme in the Bureau XCOM Declassified. Was like all of it was government redacted, like 50s era G-men, United States government type stuff, cover up conspiracies.
That world of like creative energy to pull from.
In that era of 2K, like that level of creativity was embraced. Like they, PR people and the marketing people were encouraged to kind of think outside the box and tell those kinds of tangential stories, and don't just sell the game for the game's sake. Like, be more imaginative.
Right.
Which I always look back fondly on that.
So while there and then when you moved to 2K, one of the things that I'm sure you spent a huge amount of time focusing on was Borderlands 2.
Yes.
And then all the DLC actually also, right? For Borderlands 2?
Yes.
Borderlands 2 is beloved to many people, myself included. I'm a big Borderlands 2 fan. I'd love to talk about partially just what it was like working in that area on campaigns for the game, but then also just get some context on where influencer marketing was at that point, because it's such a young industry that people like yourself have really had to pioneer best practices and just entire workflows for how do we put a campaign together, how do we measure the success of a campaign, etc. So bring me back 10 years or so. It's whatever it would have been, 2012 or something like that?
Yeah, it would have been 2011, 2012. Yeah.
And so what was that like for you?
Surreal, first of all, because, keep in mind, I'm still pretty early in my career still. So it was I was sort of, every day I would go to work and go, I can't believe I get to do this. I can't believe people are trusting me. That like Randy Pitchford, I'm having meetings with Randy Pitchford on Borderlands 2 and Ken Levine on BioShock Infinite. And we're pitching our ideas and our campaigns, and they're sitting there nodding and taking, I don't know what I was, 23, 24-year-old Scott seriously being like, oh yeah, these are great ideas, you should totally do it. So first of all, it was just like a moment in my career where I was a bit in disbelief that this was actually happening to me. So for anybody that's looking to get in the industry, like know that, yes, if you do put your mind to it, you can manifest it, but also like luck. Sometimes it's just pure, you have to recognize that it was right place, right time, access, communications, the place I was working, had the right clients.
Right.
And then on Borderlands specifically, to answer your question, I was, again, luck. Like I started that campaign as like assisting that campaign from the agency side. And then the person who was running PR for that campaign internally at 2K left the company mid-campaign. And they were sort of stuck without a lead, right? So then I kind of just filled in from the agency side as the lead. So there I am writing all the PR campaigns for this. By the end of that campaign, we had executed it so well that they just sort of poached me. They were like, would you want to just come and fill in for that position and now work with us, right? Move across the country, bring your wife with you, and we'll, you can continue doing this work. We're going to obviously make more Borderlands games and more BioShock games and all of that. So of course, I said yes and went there. To answer your question about what was different back then, when I reflect on that, everything was done physically. What you just said, you were like, well, you haven't been to a studio in 5 years. And
it's been so long since sort of having that tactility in front of you.
Man.
Back then.
So back then, everything was done like physically. We had lots of physical events. We were road warriors. We would go, you had 6 months of campaigning on the road, convention to convention to convention to convention. By the time you were at the end of it, you were like, oh my dear God, like, could I just stay home for a little while? I remember vividly the Borderlands 2 campaign kind of coming to a conclusion. It is a success. We know we're now making DLCs. And then after the 4 DLCs, we kept making these Headhunter packs. And so because that campaign and that game kind of blew up and really galvanized and created a new audience, new fandom around it. It was no longer this like cult indie hit that it was with Borderlands 1.
Yep.
It was a proper, like, this is a proper sequel. It's on the map, almost the way like Assassin's Creed 2, what that did for the Assassin's Creed franchise, you know? And with that came all of these YouTubers that had like been on the fringes, sort of covering the first game. And in between the first and second games is when YouTube really came into its own.
Yep.
And people started to just make content about singular games or singular franchises on their YouTube channels. And so I started to notice this, and I was like, okay, we have guys like Admiral Balru, we have guys like, you know, King Gathalion, Professor Broman, like there's folks on YouTube that are specifically just making content about Borderlands. And they're actually getting a lot of subscribers and a lot of views. And you may not always like what they say because they have no affiliation and no relationship with these companies yet, right? Like this is the Wild West. You know, YouTubers aren't even really at the highest level of 2K at that day. YouTubers were just super fans with YouTube channels, and the presidents and, you know, executives didn't know what to do with it.
Right.
You know, they were sort of, especially if the super fans were saying things they didn't want to hear about the game, it was sort of like, oh, why are they always so negative? Like, why do they love the game? We work so hard to make the game, you know? And so my answer to that was, we don't have established relationships with these people. We're not wrapping our arms open them and giving them a nice warm hug and saying, hey, thanks for being such a huge advocate and fan for this franchise. You know, why don't we get to know each other and work more closely together? So I kind of went on a petition after Borderlands 2 to do that. We had some things going on with our DLCs where some of those YouTubers were sort of like hacking the headhunter packs to try to unlock, because we would ship 2 headhunter packs in one download because there was memory issues. We were running out of memory on the Xbox 360 and stuff. And so there was creative solutions to solve for that on the dev side, but one of the risks on the marketing side was really eager and enthusiastic fans with YouTube channels who could do a little bit of work on the computer and knew how to like kind of get into the files, could unlock they had the code right there on their computer to unlock the next headhunter pack. So then they were like leaking and revealing stuff before we wanted it to be. Yeah. They were doing it with the best intentions, right? They were just like so passionate about it. And so here I found myself like this between the lawyers and the executives who were like, burn them with fire. And I'm like, no, they mean well. We just need to tell them what they're doing wrong, you know? And so we managed to navigate those conversations. And so it was just good old fashioned phone calls, like finding people's phone numbers and emails and saying, hey, I'm from the company. We noticed your channel. We love your content. Can we get on the phone and talk? You know, and once I started to talk to a lot of them and hear their sides of the story and then explain to them too, okay, well, we have some needs too. Like you clearly have wants. We clearly have, you know, needs. One of our needs is please don't like leak our stuff and stuff, because the lawyers, like I'm really trying to stop the lawyers from sending you cease and desist and all that kind of stuff through the lawyery thing. So that began the era of education of like, okay, these people have the potential to be amazing because they wield influence over a very passionate group of fans that love us and love our game. But we just need to work together to understand where the boundaries are and how we can empower each other, especially how the brand can empower the creator to be better, to have more influence and to get better opportunities, but to do it in a way that's not gonna like, you know, rile up the lawyers and rile up the business people who might otherwise want to put the kibosh to it. So that was the dawn of creator relations at our company at 2K.
So that was all manual in that way. It was very phone calls. So I'm assuming you would have had a spreadsheet.
We had called on
a certain number of sort of creators that you would have found from YouTube and been like, well, I'm going to give them a ring and see what they're up to, sort of thing.
Here was my approach. So I volunteered for this, right? Like nobody assigned this to me. I was sort of, I guess I naturally always had a passion for this. And I saw myself sort of as one of them because I came from the blogging world. And so back then, the word influencer didn't exist. Creator really, I don't even know if creator was really much of a word either.
It's been a weird, the etymology of that word has shifted so much.
100%. And so what I coined there was the word new media. My boss, Ryan Jones, and I were like, we need to put a label on this that executives understand. And so we were like, well, blogging was sort of the new media when the internet came around and newspapers started to go digital and there was competition on the internet to traditional print newspapers and magazines. You called blogs new media, and that was a familiar term. And so we called YouTubers for a while new media, right? And remember, Twitch didn't exist yet. Like Justin TV was barely a thing.
Sure.
And TikTok certainly, and Instagram, all that wasn't around yet either in any real way. So these new media people, we're like, we need to make a list of trusted folks that we've had a talk with, and they understand where the boundaries are. And so the way we did that was I created sort of a standardized questionnaire form. And then we created lists, as you said. We went on and it was very manual research, and we're like, okay, this person could be great, that person could be great for our different franchises. And then we divided the work up amongst our PR team at the time to do what in the PR world is called call down. So you would call these, email these people, set up interview times, you get on a phone with them, and then you would work your way through this standardized questionnaire. That way we could compare apples to apples on everybody and understand, like, okay, this person very clearly, I understand what their goal is in life and what their goal is for their channel, and also they understand my needs, and we seem compatible, Or this person, like I remember vividly talking to Markiplier before Markiplier was like,
before he was Markiplier.
Yeah, and he actually told me, he's like, dude, I so appreciate that you found me and think that we could work together, but he's like, no offense to you guys, but like, I just am not interested in covering AAA games. I'm focused right now on like the indie space and like what's new and different. So, I don't know. I don't really see a lot of opportunity for us to work together, right? And this was 2013, I guess it was. And then a few years later, Markiplier is chilling out at our Evolve booth in 2015 and asking for swag for other friends and stuff. And he's there and he's covering Evolve, and he clearly moved on and founded, evolved into the AAA space. But it started with a pretty casual conversation of, hey man, how can I help you and how can we help each other? And he was honest. He was like, I don't think we can, because that's not what I'm focused on right now.
Yeah.
And then when his focus has changed, he got back in touch. It was like,
yeah. But that was all a manual process. And it's so interesting to me that obviously, because at the time, in terms of tooling as well, like the actual stuff that a studio might want to engage with in terms of software to try and sort of hoard all these sheep and get them to go in the direction that they want. And then I can't imagine how you were trying to sort of measure success of different creators back then. That can't have been easy.
No, that was the era. That's most certainly the wild, wild west. There weren't a lot of KPIs or really anything that, it was general hype. And I think, video views was the thing that people were most interested in. Like, how many views did the videos get that you generated?
And the question then is like, do we know what these views are doing? Well,
nope.
Not necessarily.
Not then. Yeah, no, totally.
But a view is a view, so.
Yeah, exactly. So back then it was, it's no different. I mean, I guess we did the best we could with the tools we had and the manpower that we had and the experience, which was not a lot. But PR was like in the Stone Age still, measuring things in terms of like newspaper outlet circulation or like estimated impressions, which is always in the hundreds of millions. And you're like, nobody saw like
it's just all of America saw this.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the whole world. I one time had somebody told me that their estimated impressions was in the billions, and I was like, so more than half the world saw this. Right. Like, no, they didn't. It's just such a made up number. Anyway, it's we're way more sophisticated. We could talk about all the KPI stuff, but definitely on today's age, like day and age, we definitely have a lot more sophistication and understanding of what KPIs matter and what we need to get out of an activation and a partnership.
Yeah.
But no, back then it was just about, hey, can we make cool videos together and kind of hype it? And if it helps benefit you and you grow your channel, it's mutually beneficial, and if you help us get the word out there, then it helps us, right? And that in that day and age, we didn't spend any money. Like we had actually, in fact, at 2K, we had a hard no pay policy for many, many years.
Oh.
And the leadership, did not want to sponsor. And this was up until maybe like, I don't know, 2015, 2016. Mm-hmm. So I credit like 2K was really early to adopt, and all the credit in the world to Sarah Anderson, who was the CMO at the time, Christoph Hartmann, and who's the president at the time, and David Ismiller was the COO. Like those folks, and my boss Ryan Jones, who was our VP of communications. They saw the potential. Like I was able to talk to them and say, just the same way that blogs became more relevant than traditional print newspapers, YouTubers, and what will become content creators, what we call new media, they're the next wave of that. They're the next wave of influence, and we need to be focused on treating them with the same level of care, trust, and respect that we do IGN. And all that means is just give them a seat at the table, vet them ahead of time, obviously call them, understand what their real name is, understand where they live and what their motivations are, what their goals are. Well, that was a lot of the questionnaire would be like, what do you want from your life? Like, what do you want from your channel? Like, because if I can understand that, I can start to think of ways that I can use our game and what we have, the resources that we have to help you achieve that, while also getting what we need, hopefully, out of like the promotion of the game. But so much of it was just convincing people, please just trust them. we'll teach them what an embargo is and how not to break it, and give them a seat at the table. And that worked amazingly for 4 or 5 years. People, I remember vividly, like Angry Joe, Total Biscuit, God rest his soul, like everybody, who even Markiplier, people were like, thank you for just noticing I exist and giving and trusting me to be able to come to your booth at E3 and play the game sitting next to, Ryan McCaffrey at IGN. Like that was a big deal back then. But there was a turning point, and the turning point was like somewhere along 2015, 2016, Ubisoft, Activision, other companies had, their creator relations spawned out of like the paid media side of the business, whereas ours spawned out of the earned media on the communications team. And so then you start to see companies doing more sponsorships. And that wasn't new in the world, like in the industry of influencer marketing. That had been already happening in like the fashion industry, the beauty industry, probably the automotive industry, like more mature industries than the gaming industry was already doing sponsorships. I think those other bigger, maybe more sophisticated publishers were already looking at that. And so they started to do it. And as soon as it was an interesting era of creator relations, because it's like, okay, as soon as that happens, now what? What happens? All these questions around authenticity, are they just going to be another like endorser, the like classical celebrity endorser, where like Tom Brady is repping Gillette razor blades and Gillette sponsors the field, that he plays on. And it's like, does Tom Brady really use Gillette razor blades and give a shit? Like, and so we've all been trained to question that stuff. We were wondering if that would happen as well.
Understandably, because also
right?
These are like 16-year-old kids.
Yes.
So like, well, I mean, there's a lot more question of authenticity with some random kid in their bedroom compared to Tom Brady. So even more amplified.
Yeah, and then the fear, there was a lot of fear. Everything was fear driven in that era of like, well, it's a real slippery slope. We've worked with, we've been working with, insert name for years, and all we've ever done is just help cover the cost of their flight to E3 or help cover the cost of the flight to the studio so that they could play. There was no other money exchanged, and we're giving them the freedom to say what they want to say. There's no strings attached, right? And that felt good to everybody. At the moment, it was like, well, you pay that person now, they're going to always want to be paid. And now it's this slippery slope, and it's like, okay, but that's the way that, and we didn't have this language back then, the creator economy, but like, that's the way the creator economy is going. Like that was effectively the beginning of the creator economy, and there were people at the company that didn't understand this is happening. Whether you like it or not, it's already happening, and our competitors are doing it better, and they're setting new expectations for how our relationship is going to work, whether we like it or not.
I remember actually, I went to an event in, I think it was 2017.
Yeah.
And I was having a conversation with Activision, and I was actually at the event with Activision, but had been doing some stuff with EA at the time.
Yeah.
And to speak to the point that you just made exactly, the fear of, oh, well, it's a slippery slope, and then we'll be paying for everything, and oh no. I tried to explain to them at the time that you had to recognize that, but match it with a fear that if you didn't act, everyone else would be getting ahead.
Yeah.
All these other companies, all these other publishers, all these other studios were already deploying all of these techniques and tactics and strategies and deploying money in that area.
Yeah.
And so where an EA might have been doing one thing and an Activision might have been doing another, and the deviation between the two, I spent a lot of time in those days talking to these studios and being like, well, I'm in the middle of all this.
Yeah.
And I can see the best practices and I can see what's really working across all these different studios. So listen. Like that would be a great idea, right?
Totally.
Obviously, it's not that simple, but it's been fascinating over the years how those sorts of conversations have changed, and how, I mean, at this point, pretty much everyone is on board with the idea that the heart in this machine is beating real strong and it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, and the fear is
such a driver.
Yeah, and I think it's gone away, because I think that people have realized you can sponsor a creator and also work with them in an earned capacity, and it doesn't always have to be payment, you know, and it isn't. In fact, I would say that's like the worst possible situation for both creator and brand is when it's purely transactional. It's like, yes, there should be a transaction of value there, but the value has to be more than just money, and so, because I think now you can see good relationships where it's like, okay, yeah, you've been sponsored to come to this event, you've seen XYZ game, you do have an obligation to create at least one video or whatever for that. But then oftentimes it's like, if the creator likes it, they're going to continue, and if their audience reacts well to it, it's like they're motivated to make more. And
Absolutely.
that's unpaid, right? And so oftentimes I felt like, and this is now further into the future, but once proper influencer marketing started at the company, we would see a lot of that all the time, where you're like, you use it to sort of, so that the creator feels valued and that you are fairly compensating them for all the time and energy that they're putting into this. Because let's be honest, if you were to take your marketing money and use it to pay a video production company to make an asset for you, you'd probably be spending a lot more money actually, and it would get a lot less reach and would be a lot less relevant.
And exactly.
All that 100%. Stuff. Yeah. So the story at 2K is interesting because eventually at one point there was a change in leadership, and the new leadership that came in was from outside our industry, was from outside the games industry, and brought with them a much better understanding, mature understanding of what modern influencer marketing was, because it was already happening, like I said, in these other industries, automotive and in fashion and beauty, and so I sort of used that at that point in my career, I was the communications director, sort of responsible for PR, social media, and our own channel, social media content creation. And then community was kind of rolled into that. And then influencer didn't exist. And I was like, we're missing a discipline within this group. And the word for it is influencer marketing. And I feel like it was just one of those, again, kind of part luck, part vision of hope that like, all right, I've actually been doing influencer marketing before that term was around for a lot of years, and I've got all this experience doing it, but our company has not allowed us to really fully step into how all the potential that it had when we could like start to have a budget, start to do proper sponsorships, start to get more sophisticated in our understanding of the KPIs, and like, we always call them like levers, like which lever are we pulling? Is it acquisition? Is it retention? Is it conversion? Is it engagement? Like, and how are we spending our money on that? And what are we getting in return for it? And all of that level of sophistication I had read about, I had heard about, that was happening in other places. And I'm like, man, we need that. So I made my pitch. I was like, I shot my shot. I went to, said to the CMO, we have 2 communication directors effectively on our team that equally have experience doing this. Why don't we let Joe DeMiro, who's awesome, be the communications director in charge of all of that. I would like to just start a new group that's influencer marketing.
Right.
Okay. And he and I will be partners, and but I will stop worrying about public relations and social media content and all that, and I'll just focus on building a new team that is dedicated to influencer marketing. And thankfully Melissa Bell and Corey Barrett and other folks at the company were fantastic about it, and super supportive. So that was a blessing.
So that started in 2019 or so?
I think so. Yeah.
And so that was, you were
2018, 2019.
director of global influence marketing.
Yeah, director of global influencer marketing, which is a wild ride. Like, we had, what was so fun about that was we had at that time the most amazing international marketing managers and communication managers who understood influencer and were in many ways already breaking the rules of pay. Like, they wanted to pay, they wanted to sponsor. I remember vividly the German teams like, we're going to sponsor Rocket Beans, we're going to, we're going to sponsor Gronk. And I was, and the US based team was just like, I don't know, we kind of have this wishy-washy policy. And I was so glad that they were already doing it, because that was the future no matter what. And they were just going to force us in that direction, whether the higher ups liked it or not.
Sure.
And that's where we ended up going. And so we already had this head start that everybody was embracing it, but there was definitely a period of education to figure out, like, we have to talk about, reach versus resonance versus relevancy, and like these academic principles of influencer marketing, of understanding it's not just about reach. Reach is easy to see. You're like, okay, I'm going to sponsor this person. They have millions of subscribers, and therefore they will just get me massive awareness.
If only.
And you're like, maybe, but also, are they the right person for this game? I see it happen all the time. Publishers and will sponsor someone because they love the reach, and maybe that person also has like excellent reps that are really good at selling them. But that guy or gal doesn't play the actual game or the franchise that you're promoting. And so it's not relevant to the creator and and it will therefore have no resonance with the audience. Yep. Right. And so it's like those 3 things have to click for it to work, and not just work for the brand, but work for the content creator as well. Because I don't want to speak for you, but in my experience, it's like the worst thing is when you feel like you're talking about a game that you're actually not passionate about. And then your audience can tell you're not passionate about it. And then they're like, oh, is he just selling out and taking a paycheck?
And you're reading bullet points that are in a brief, and it says, well, our internal sort of goals for this, we want you to talk about how incredible it was to buy these skins.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, well, guys, I don't know if I can say that actually, because I've never played your game before.
Yeah, totally.
So, like,
Totally.
there's been so much of that over the years, and the fact that at that time when you were really developing what that role meant in the company, the fact that you were switched on to those things is clearly why it's been successful for you, and where other studios or other companies, not even necessarily in games, but the wider space, have, I think, stumbled a lot over the years, and some I think still are, because they haven't made that realization yet that a creator isn't just a funnel to get views from. Like, that's not the extent of that relationship. There is so much more to it. And you have to treat creators as a business as you would treat any other business. And it's something I say to people all the time, that will be either they're small companies and they're just sort of getting their feet wet with influence marketing or things in that area. And I'll say to them, like, okay, maybe you're a startup, you're making a game, you're an indie studio making a game. You've got to convince this creator that not only is your game good, but it's worth building a relationship with you, because they don't know if you're going to turn around and pull some stuff that's going to be really kind of disgraceful for the community, and then their reputation is going to be tarnished. Like, there's all this back and forth now, where previously we were just kids in a bedroom making a video, right?
Exactly.
So there's an entire process of massaging those relationships into place and keeping them sort of understanding each other's needs in a big way that just wasn't there.
No,
so
exactly right.
I guess that's where you were putting all their sort of energy.
I had to educate our team. Yeah, exactly right. I had to educate the team to understand what the values and the value exchange between content creator and brand, because oftentimes they would only focus on what they needed, and you're like, okay, but the content creator also needs this. And when you can achieve both things and it's a win-win for brand and for creator, that's where the magic happens. Like, you have to shoot for that. That's the goal every time. And then naturally, I think the hardest thing for any influencer marketer at this point in time, and it's part of the challenge is also now being passed on to the creator themselves, is ROI. Like, the actual hard metrics of what you're doing and why it matters. Like, is it actually affecting a result that's getting you more sales, getting you more awareness, and so I always talked about it with my team through the lens of acquisition, retention, engagement, and conversion. And it's like those are one of 4 results that you want to drive. Sometimes you can drive more than one at the same time, but you need to be at least thinking about those when you're going into each activation that you're doing. Each event or each individual sponsorship. Know that, okay, I'm spending this amount of money with this creator to achieve acquisition. And acquisition means I'm driving more, it could mean I'm driving more people to follow my own social channels, or I'm driving more people to my website so that they can learn more about a game, right?
Or you're sending them to a Steam page.
Right.
Wish
for wish listing,
so many options, right?
Versus, retention, it's like, okay, I already have them within my marketing ecosystem in one way, shape, or form, or maybe they're already a player. If you're like a live service game, that's always huge for major games like FIFA and NBA 2K and Warzone and all live service games. How do I continue to speak to the existing audience I have and keep them engaged and retained in the game so that they don't wash out and cycle out? Or conversion. Conversion's the most difficult, I think, because not every creator wants to actually hard sell their audience to like, hey, you should buy now. So, but driving somebody to convert, but I will say like that is becoming increasingly, I think, the number one KPI for influencer marketers. And the reason for that is the budgets, like brands have caught on. Brands know this. I mean, creators know this. Why the creator economy is like booming is that brands are pouring more and more money into that. In the games that I worked on, by the time I left 2K, we had the second largest line item in every major marketing budget after paid media, which is like digital advertisements, displays on IGN, or like YouTube,
Times Square,
Times Square billboards, YouTube pre-roll ads, like that's paid media. Influencer marketing would be a line item within the overall paid budget, and it was increasingly becoming like the second largest item. And so when that happens, and I think that, again, all credit to the leadership that they believed in the discipline, still do believe and invest in the discipline. Companies like Bethesda only just recently hired like anybody to do any dedicated influencer marketing, right? So there are companies, there are still publishers that don't have dedicated teams. right? Like Ubisoft was like first to the table. They like have a team that's great. 2K was doing it. EA has teams that are dedicated to it. Like there are major publishers that have it. There are still some that are just catching on now and realizing like, and they hire like maybe one person.
Sure.
We were lucky at 2K. We had a team of I think 7 or 8 people just in the United States.
Right.
And we had managers in every major language in every country, and so lots and lots of budget was being put into that. Okay, what's the trade-off? Trade-off is like people like me have their ass on the line in the meeting where they go, show me the money.
Yeah.
Show me where the money is going and how you are generating sales, right? And so I won't divulge who I'm working with, but I've had some email exchanges going on with a rather large creator out there who can potentially drive a lot of conversion, but it's like the sponsorship value is incredibly large. It's a very large ask, and it's a very big risk when you take a lot of your money from one area and you decide, okay, let's not roll as many YouTube pre-roll ads that are more proven. That's a more proven, more tried method of advertising that has a little bit more, a lot more attribution, proven attribution.
And you can understand, you can project so much more easily as well. You can say, okay, well, we know conversion here is going to be 1%, and we know that this is going to click through 2%, and so you can run the numbers.
It's risk management. It's risk management. You're managing the risk of your money out there, and savvy business leaders and C-suite executives are increasingly held accountable to be able to show to their board of directors, the president, or your shareholders, if I spend this amount of money, I'm going to get roughly this amount of money back, right? And it better be more than what you're spending in order for it to be net positive ROI. So all of that is now forces influencer marketers to be more sophisticated, to have better tools, and to demand of creators. And this is the part where if you're a creator listening, like this is super important. You need to know what your average click-through rates are. You need to know what your average click-to-conversion rates are. Those are metrics that we on the brand side are increasingly, we look at that and go, okay, I'm going to sponsor you. I expect to get your average views per video in the first 30 days or first 15 days or whatever is X. I know that. I have tools that can tell me that. I don't even need creators necessarily to have that info, though they should. But if your campaign is not about driving awareness, if it's not just like, okay, we just need views for views' sake so that word is out there.
Which increasingly they rarely are because of exactly what we're talking about.
Exactly right. And then it's like, okay, so in addition to that, that's like my secondary goal. My first goal though is I want you to then be able to say, and I had a blast doing this, playing this game genuinely. I want you to genuinely say that. I don't want you to say it if you don't actually believe that. Then, link in the description, click to buy through if you want to, right? It doesn't ever have to be a hard sell. In fact, I think hard sells are probably bad. But if you liked what you saw, if you believe what I'm saying, which
more,
exactly
like
all those things, please consider clicking the link below. Okay, so if you're a creator that can generate high click-through rates on that, so that they at least land on a landing page or a storefront page to give further consideration, that's incredibly valuable. Most creators I work with don't even know what their average click-through rate is.
Yeah, and to be clear, so that creators listening are also understanding what you're saying, because there's another layer of click-through rate, obviously, in making a YouTube video, which is just how many people are going to land on the video based on the impressions it's getting, right? So if it's in recommended, your click-through rate is out of that total number of folks who is clicking onto the content. However, we're talking about link click-through in the description of the video, in the pinned comment, or wherever. I mean, it might not be a video, it might be an Instagram post or something. You might have a link in bio, you might have a link tree, whatever it might be. Wherever you're trying to send folks to, it's about measuring whether they are being sent or whether they're resisting that in some way or whatever, right?
And there's a second factor to it, and this is where, again, everything, no matter what, goes back to relationship, strength of your relationship between creator and the creator relations in the brand. So the most sophisticated way that I am aware of, at least or I've used to date, to figure this out is, yes, you have your click-through in the link description, and the creator should know that and be able to understand that. Or if you're really trustworthy, like trusting of each other, maybe the brand gives you a Bitly link or something that they can self-serve and get that info, which makes it less hard on the creator to have to produce that data. But then it's like, okay, if you're driving through to a landing page, let's say you drive to a pre-order page on like EA or 2K's website. Usually when you land there, you then have to choose your platform of choice and your edition, like standard edition, deluxe edition, or whatever. When you click that, it then redirects you out to the actual storefront page, like to Sony's storefront or Xbox's storefront or to GameStop. At that point, that's like a click to buy. Like, so now we have intent. The person has now clicked off a YouTube video, landed on a website. Then they've clicked off that website to land on a retail page. At that point, no one's tracking that traffic anymore. but we know that you had an intention to buy, and that there's a portion of people that are going to probably actually go through with that transaction. So we're close to connect. You can connect all those dots, but the creator needs the brand to tell them how many people actually left the retail page after they clicked my link.
Exactly, yeah.
You know what I mean?
I have no visibility of that as a creator if I post
No, you don't.
that.
Right.
Because even if I've given you a tracking link,
Yes.
as soon as they're going from that link to somewhere else, it's out of my hands.
Right. What I would suggest is, based on the strength of your relationship, if the brand is demanding that you as the creator provide your average click-through rates, you should also ask for their click to buy. I call it click to buy intent, like your click to buy out or buy, click off link basically rate, because now that will give you a more complete story of how effective you are at actually moving units. You can actually say like, oh, we have, if even you can be hyper conservative, you can say, oh, if even 1% of the people that clicked off of the pre-order page to land on the Xbox storefront page bought the game, it sold this many units, which generated this many dollars, right? And so I think that's a powerful sales tool for creators when they're making their one sheets, or if they work with representation, for their reps to have that information, because increasingly I feel like that's what influencer marketers are. They're held to that rigorous standard by their executives.
Yep.
And so the creators need to know, like, okay, that's what my pal over at EA or my pal at 2K is gonna. That's what he needs to stay employed.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's crazy because this conversation, obviously, you were thinking about these things in 2019, 2020 when you were sort of architect of this role at 2K.
Yeah.
But there are still brands today that they'll specify exactly what they want for my reporting. I'll do a paid campaign. It might be just like a one-time fee. I'm doing a sponsored video of some description, whether it's an integration or it's an entire dedicated video. And they're like, we just want the impressions.
Yeah.
I'm like, well,
yeah.
Are you sure? Because the impressions on YouTube are not people that watch the video.
Yeah, totally.
That's just the thumbnail being on the page.
Totally.
So like, how is that helping you in any way? And so there's...
Maybe they don't know. Maybe they don't know.
Yeah.
We're still in a point where people are catching on. There's a level of... Some people are incredibly sophisticated at what they're doing, and other people are not.
Right.
And I see it every day. It oscillates based on, or varies rather, based on agencies even. Some agencies are very good and understand this, and other agencies are still stuck in 5 years ago where they're just like, views is all that matters and impressions are all that matter. So,
and I think a big part of that comes from the fact that so many agencies that are getting into the space now recognize that the creator economy is if I recall correctly, at last sort of estimate, like $120 billion industry or something, right?
Yeah.
So that's great. How do we get a piece of that pie? But they're coming from a trad media background and then applying some of those same things like we talked about, like circulation kind of idea. Well, impressions are kind of circulation, so maybe that's where the analog is there.
Yeah.
But it's not such an easy translation to make, and I think it leads to all these really bizarre scenarios where I might be asked for something in my reporting, or I might be asked to do something in the creative process as part of the content that I know full well doesn't move the needle at all in terms of the viewer's likelihood to buy, their intent to buy, their intent to do anything that I want them to do or the brand wants them to, because it's still rooted in a flow of a consumer engaging with a product that might have worked 15 years ago, but just isn't the way the world works anymore.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear, as part of your process of realizing that in some ways the sort of fire was being held to your feet in those sort of meetings where you're like, I have to prove that this is making a difference.
Oh, yeah.
Were there any specific tools that you might have been using at the time, or was it stuff that you built internally, or what was your kind of relationship with that side of things?
Yeah. No, we have a large suite of tools. We did at 2K. I don't know what they have anymore, but and we don't have it at Ascendant Studios because we're a smaller startup, so we can't afford it. Like there's a lot of that. But I do, I remember actually sitting with I want to say I was sitting with Angry Joe at our E3 booth one time, and I was talking to him about it, and I was like, oh yeah, no, he was making his case to me. He was like pitching about all the views and his metrics and stuff, and I was like, Joe, I already know all that stuff.
Right.
Like I already have, and I was like, I explained what Tubular is. There's a tool called Tubular that's fantastic video analytics tool, and there was a tool called Synthesio that's still very widely used. That's like a social listening platform that will tell you the volume of conversation that's out there across all the different social channels, and you can drill down into very specific stuff. So do you want me to just talk about the tools we used with my favorite ones, or?
Yeah, one or two sort of insights into what using those tools is like, and maybe for a creator that might be listening, how they can understand how those tools are kind of getting a view of what they're doing online and sort of taking a lot of the brain and the thinking out of the process for you so that you can just say, okay, I need insights on this person or insights on this campaign and what that sort of generated thing might look like.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So I'll top line the tools. Like we had our tool suite was Synthesio for social listening, which is like a pure social listening platform. It'll tell you how the volume of mentions that and you could drill down into very specific stuff if you wanted. We used Spike Trap, which is no longer really, it was purchased by Reddit, so it's only useful for Reddit now. But Spike Trap was fantastic, and someone else will make a version of it. I'm sure it was before its time. It was AI, machine learning. Instead of you telling the tool what you wanted to find, like through search queries and Boolean searches, it was just listening to conversation and then detecting different conversations that were happening and grouping them together into cohorts. And that was that was a game changer, because now all of a sudden you can monitor the conversation for like Immortals of Aveum, our game at Ascendant, and you can, instead of wondering what people are saying, the tool was like, here's what people are saying.
Incredible.
There are like 7 different coherent conversations, is what they were called, that were happening, meaning there was enough volume of mentions about a certain topic that it would go boop, and it would group them together into one topic, and it would tell you this is a topic that's happening. And it might be, for examples, it might be about a specific character. It might be about system specs. It might be about, I don't know, you name it. And it would not only tell you that the volume of that conversation, how many people are talking about it, it would tell you its sentiment, because it's machine learning. Yeah. So it's learned the vernacular of gamers, and it can understand the nuances between a gamer saying, this game is the shit, and it'll be like, that's positive. Yep. Or this game is shit. And it'll be like, that's very negative. Yep. And so now all of a sudden we could not only tell what was being said, but what it meant. Was it positive or negative? So that was pretty big game changer. That tool still exists, but it's only focused, I think, on Reddit now, because it was purchased by Reddit. Yeah. So Reddit definitely saw the value in that technology for understanding its audiences and the convo that's happening on its platform. But Tubular was definitely one of the biggest for us in video analytics. And the thing that changed the game, I think, and really I could see was like a moment of like mind blown within the staff at 2K that was working on influencers, was when we started to talk about this metric V30, and it's built into the Tubular platform. But at the time, everyone was so fixated on subscriber count and then view count to some degree. Like you would be like, I get 100 million views a year or whatever on my channel, and look how many subscribers I have. I remember people were it was like, should I or should I not work with PewDiePie, for example? Like, he's expensive, but he has all these subscribers. Yep. And Tubular allowed me to look at it very analytically and go, okay, yes, large subscribers, but look at the average views in the first 30 days. And that's what V30 stood for, is average views in the first 30 days. And what it would do is it would actually look at the last, I want to say it was like 10 or 20 videos. Might have been it was the 3 months, the last 3 months of your video, but on a rolling basis. Yep. So it was always tracking on a rolling basis your last 3 months worth of videos. And then it was averaging out what your views were on all of those videos in the last 3 months in the first 30 days of the life of that video, if that makes any sense. So that became an invaluable tool as soon as I could explain what that meant to the team, because I was like, look, this is your predictive stat. When you go to sponsor this person and like you're staring at their large subscriber count and thinking it's going to be a huge win, and then later you're disappointed. Well, their V30 says that you should only expect to get 30,000 views on that video in its first 30 days, despite they might have 3 million subscribers, right? And that's a really important number to understand if you're a brand person. It's equally super important if you're a creator, because your value is not based on your subscriber account. Right. Yes. And that's, I think, a mental health thing too. I think people need to understand Yeah, like that. And so that tool was phenomenal. It is phenomenal. It's industry leading. It's also very expensive. So that's why I don't have it at my startup.
But it's so interesting so you had the sentiment tracking and then some measurement tooling, and would have been able to combine these all together in many ways because you guys and the rest of the industry were figuring this out in real time. And so it's not like you can just look at a study that has been done 30 years ago to be like, well, this is how this sort of media marketing would work. Guys
we were making
doing
it up.
The studies.
We were making it up on the fly. We were literally writing the studies.
And I'm sure that you probably have contacts around the entire industry who are all also doing this in their own little ecosystems at the same time. And so you might talk to someone and be like, oh, that's possible? I didn't realize that there would be all these different levers that you could pull, right?
Yeah. And it was tough. That it still is tough, but it's getting better in that, like, what we were doing, I felt like, I had a guy on my team, Mitch Ingrat, who is out there right now as a free agent. Anybody that wants him, he's probably the best guy in this industry in terms of data analytics and just how to think about influencer marketing through
Amazing.
Like,
I should get him on the pod.
Yeah, you should. I'll hook you up. He'd be a fantastic interview. We would go around and have these conversations. Zola is another company, Zola, I think is what they're called, but they're focused on attribution and being able to like do affiliate marketing programs for your game. And so anyway, Mitch and I got really focused on that, on like attribution and on the numbers. And we would go have these conversations with other talent rep companies. I won't name all of them. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but we would go and talk to talent companies and we'd have similar to what I have just said to you. Like, these are our needs. This is what we're looking for. And they would just look at us like with a blank stare.
Glazed over.
Yeah, we were like, damn it. Like we need the rest of the people around us to like kind of either catch up, or are we crazy? Like, is this not, like it's so unproven. It was so unproven at the time that we were also asking ourselves, like, are we crazy? Is this just not like how it's, but now I think we know that we're not crazy and that this is the direction it was going in, but groups were just catching up. And, so when I would talk to my colleagues at other companies, whether it be like PlayStation, Xbox was doing, like starting to do it, Ubisoft was already doing a pretty good job at it. I always felt like they were pretty much on par. EA had their Game Changer program, but I don't know what it was like on the sponsorship sides of things. But yeah, we would talk to them, and most of the time it was just difficult. Like, it was stories about difficulty around getting the executives to understand all of this because it was so new. And to your point, many of those executives, right, because they're older and they've had a whole storied career to get themselves to now be in the C-suite, but yeah, they remember the studies, the case studies from 30 years ago, right? When it was like the Mad Men era of advertising.
Yeah.
And, and so then you're trying to explain how this fast moving new metrics work and all this stuff. And, it's just a challenge. I was so fortunate at 2K that our executives really understood it and actually were, and if they didn't understand something, they actually put in the time to learn.
Amazing.
Which is great. So there was so much empowerment there. This is the only reason it worked. And I would go to E3.
Your career, I think, is sort of evidence of that, where had they been like, no, they just wouldn't have been able to create that role, or like, et cetera.
100%. So yeah, I feel very fortunate that I was able to do that. And then, to come to Ascendant Studios, Brett, our CEO and founder, he admits, like, he's a game designer and a director of game stories. He was like, I don't know any of this stuff, but I trust you, and that, again, empowerment from leadership is so critical.
So let's talk about Ascendant. Let's get into it.
Okay, sure.
So we've sort of laid some groundwork here for your career, where you've been with 2K and previously, and all the lessons that you've been learning over that time, and that you've realized are it's Pandora's box, man. Once you realize that there is value there, but you need to sort of approach it in the right way, you can spend a lifetime trying to sort of optimize that whole system, right?
Yes.
So you have a new studio.
Yep.
You're a startup. It was founded by
Brett Robbins.
Who is the previous creative director or co-creative director, I'm not sure, of Dead Space.
Yes, he was creative director. Yeah, Glenn Schofield was the game director and studio head.
Got you, yes. So Brett then later was working with Sledgehammer and was the creative director there at one point. And then following that, founded the studio.
Yes.
And so you've had a studio now, it's been 5 years, I think, the sort of age of the studio itself. You've been here since 2022, is that right? Or 2021 or so?
Yeah, I'm coming up on like a year and a half.
Towards the end half of the pandemic, basically, right?
Yes, yep, exactly.
And so you have a situation on your hands that I think actually, really interestingly, is mirrored in a couple of different areas around the industry, because in the last, I'd say, 3-ish years or so, I think Ascendant was actually a little early in this, but there have been a lot of other studios where you've had these splinter sort of factions of game devs that have been at one studio, and it's typically a massive AAA studio with a massive publisher.
Yes.
And they've been like, this has been great and we've learned so much. We want a little bit more ownership. We're going to start our own new thing, right? And I can think of Deviation Games, where they've got a whole bunch of folks there. There's, I think it's Bad Moon and Entertainment or something along those lines. Or is it?
New Moon.
Maybe I'm getting it wrong. There's those guys. There's, I think, Secret Door is another one.
Yes.
There's a whole suite of them, right? And they're all in this position of having a new studio, but with a new studio means new sort of rules, new groundwork, new processes, new pipelines for making things happen.
Yeah.
And you, as director of marketing,
Yep.
right at the studio, have an awful lot to make happen.
Yes.
Because you've got this video game, Immortals of Aveum.
Yep.
It's coming out on July 20th.
Yep, 20th.
Got that right? Phew.
Nailed it.
And as part of that, you have to build out influencer relations and,
Yes.
and all those sorts of things. So talk to me about, as a new studio, where do you begin? Before we continue the conversation here, I just want to take 30 seconds to talk to you about pipeline.gg. Here at Pipeline, we put a lot of focus and energy into helping scale the businesses of creators who are at the start of their careers, and then supporting them with tools and services as they grow and ensure that they can maintain that growth for decades to come. To give you a taste of what Pipeline has to offer, we've put together a free PDF download, which helps give you an idea of how creators build out their teams and go from being a company of one to a company of many. It's a really difficult jump for many of us, myself included. But when I first did it and expanded my team, I went from something like 5 million views a month to 33 million in the next month. If you want to learn more about how I did that, there's a link in the show notes. You can just click on that, pop your email in, and we'll send the guide over straight to you. For now, though, let's get back to the show.
Oh, man. It was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying.
Right.
Like, and, you know, if you haven't, I guess if you haven't figured it out by now at this point in our combo, like, I guess I'm a person that always needs a challenge, and I definitely have ambition and drive, but I felt like at 2K I had reached sort of the point where created this team. It was working. We stood it up. We proved it out with the launch of Borderlands 3, which was like, you know, huge. Like we did something that nobody had done in the industry before, not just our group. I mean, it was a massive undertaking and effort, you know, Pat Alvarado and the brand team and the events crew, but like we put on this Borderlands 3 gameplay reveal moment, and, you know, had 200 streamers streaming Borderlands 3 live at the same location, all at once, right?
Myself included.
Yeah, you were there. And it was, you know, so that was something I had wanted to do for years. I pitched that on Battleborn, and it was like approved, but then disapproved, and long story behind all of that. So it's like, finally we did it. And I was like, cool, man, we've sort of reached, like, I've reached the apex of what I wanted to achieve with the team. And now it was going to become like, okay, now we just keep doing this, refining it, iterating and making it better. But like, I put the right people in place.
You went 0 to 1.
Yeah.
And now it's,
and so I guess I have that entrepreneurial mindset of like, I built a team, I hired incredibly smart people, better people than me, that like really took ideas, ran with it. The entire like 2K Next Makers program existing was like an idea that I had, that then Mitch and Constant and Cammy, like these people took it and just ran with it and really did the hard work of executing it and you know, maintaining it after I was gone. And so I reached this point where I was like, okay, cool, I could keep doing this. My wife probably, you know, she was like, yeah, why don't we just slow down? Why don't you just enjoy the fruits of your labor? You know, and I was approached like toward the tail end of the pandemic. Coincidentally, right, I live really close to the studio. And so here's this AAA studio making this AAA game. And I'd never heard of Ascendant Studios, other than a couple colleagues of mine ended up leaving 2K and working here. So I knew of them, but I didn't know much more other than that. I hadn't seen the game. So they were getting ready to launch, and they approached me and they said, you know, we're looking for a marketing person, and you've been recommended basically, and would you consider just like talking to us? So, you know, it was a long, probably like 6-month process of Brett and I talking about the vision like that he has for himself, talking about the vision he has for the game, which wasn't, you know, it didn't have a name at the time. It was just Immortals was the project name.
Yep.
Talking about his values at the studio and why he founded it and how he runs the company and why he feels it's different than some of the other studios he had worked at, you know, big studios, Sledgehammer and EA Redwood Shores and Visceral and all these places. And then, you know, he showed me the game, and I saw the game and I was like, damn, this is special, you know. And remember, right? I'm the guy that I worked on BioShock Infinite. I've worked on a lot of single player story driven games, and those are my favorite to play personally. And so I reached a point in my career where I'm like, I think like this could be the most terrifying thing I could do, and also if I do this right, it could be the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life, career wise. And so Brett and I worked it out, and I accepted the job, and I came and I said, and one of the biggest, most like, one of the biggest opportunities that was the most exciting for me was a blank slate. Brett was like, look, I don't do marketing. I make games, and I want somebody that can just do the marketing and you know, take my wishes into consideration. And I said, Brett, first of all, the game I think is destined to be a hit. Like, you guys have to obviously finish making it and make it to quality, and you know, squash bugs, all the stuff that good games do. But the concept is so freaking original that I cannot envision this not eventually being successful.
Right.
So I'm excited about the project, but the thing that maybe I was most excited about was the blank slate that the studio had. It had a cool logo already, and it had a cool name, Ascendant, which he did put thought behind. He was like, no, I mean, we are rising, rising in influence, rising in power. Like, we'd like to eventually be ascendant.
Yeah.
Right now we are ascending. And I was like, okay, cool. There's like already some thought behind that. And that was about where it ended.
Okay.
That was like, you know, I
so
was
we're
like,
aspirational, but
yeah,
thank you very much.
And so just my personality, like I love blank whiteboards. I love blank pages. I'm not as fearful as some writers with the blinking cursor on the screen. You're like, what do I do? Where do I go? And I said, oh, what an amazing opportunity. We have a studio full of veteran talent that have made some of the biggest games in this industry, right? Like Brett was the creative director on the original Dead Space. He creative directed 3 different Call of Duty campaigns, right? The ones that were like some of the best ones that I liked, Advanced Warfare, the original Modern Warfare 3, World War II, like all those were fantastic. But even before that, he was working on like Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, From Russia with Love, James Bond. He worked on Gex.
Okay.
Like he worked on Blood Omen. Like, man, So, and then, guys, we have women and men that were from like Telltale here who unfortunately were part of the layoffs when Telltale originally closed. But, they were responsible for making the original Walking Dead games, the Tales from the Borderlands, Wolf Among Us, like some of my favorite games there, the Game of Thrones games. And then as the studio expanded, we just got talent from everywhere. We have producers that worked on Spider-Man. We've got people, our writer, Michael Kirkbride, wrote Elder Scrolls Oblivion, and Morrowind. Like,
oh my God.
He's like a fantasy writing guru, man, like a mastermind. And so I was like, wow, I'm so blessed to have inherited a team that has all this talent. And we're a little bit older. I think it's like we're studio. I like to say we're probably like our average age is probably like late 30s, early 40s. Like we've got people. Certainly we have junior people that are younger, but our average year of experience is probably like somewhere between 10 and 10 to 35 years of experience, which is crazy. And with that comes like this air of sort of like there was like a humbleness and maturity to the team that I really appreciated. And so it's like, okay, you got all these like rock star developers that also aren't like braggadocious, and they're just like, cool, I do it because I love it, whatever. I'm like, okay, well, I can work with this. Like, we can build a brand out of this. We can figure out, how to describe ourselves. And so the first thing I did was start to talk to my boss, our COO, Spencer Hunt, about core values, like core company values. Because I was like, do we have core values as a company? He's like, nope. Nobody's
right.
We have.
That needs to be defined. Like, it's a new thing.
I think as a startup, it's like a lot of people came together and they just treated each other well. And they were in it because they're passionate about games, and that's not atypical. Like that's we're not unique in that. That's pretty typical of most companies. Like it starts and ends with your passion for what you're making as a video game. But then the further you get along in that process of actually making the game, the less time you have to spend to think about the big picture. What do we stand for? What are our values? So I was like, okay, look, functionally as a marketing person, to do this well, authentically, genuinely. So again, maybe part of my content creation and creator relations and like mindset.
Yeah, definitely.
It's like, we need to be genuine. And I said, what I'd like to do is I'd like to position our company as a creator company. I think, and I have all this language now because the creator economy finally came into its own and it's developing language to describe things. And I'm like, wouldn't it be great if we could, we are a creative group, right? I'm coming from a publisher that was very business focused. Now I'm at a group that's very creative focused, which is I've always been the creative person swimming in business people, trying to figure out how do I get my creative idea through the pipeline of business checkpoints.
Translate it into C-suite language.
Yes, exactly. And now I'm in a place where, you have an idea and people are like, cool, try it. And you're like, okay, what do I need to tell you to justify it? They're like, you already did, just try it.
Right, amazing.
I was like, awesome. So I was like, okay, I think we have the opportunity to position ourselves as a creator company where video games are our top creation, but we create more than that. I said, what if we're creating podcasts? What if we're creating YouTube video series? Like, what if one day our IP is so successful that we can take it into, transmedia space and it can become, serialized, streaming television show? What if it can become comic books? What if it can become audio narrated podcasts? The marketing team that we create could be responsible for doing all of that. So I sold that idea in, and everyone was like, that sounds great. I'm like, okay, well, now to do that genuinely, to execute that, I need to know who we are. Because if you're doing this, right, for yourself, like, you know who you are, you know what your channel is, you know how to be yourself, you're a one-man band, that's easier, a little bit easier to figure out. When you're a collective of 125 people, you know, to do it justice, I didn't want to, what I said to everybody when I spoke to the team when I first came on board was like, I don't want to just make up words and labels for our company that I think sound nice and that I know people would react well to on the internet, and just check boxes.
Yep.
Because it's disingenuous. And so I said, what we're going to do is we're going to undertake sort of an exploration over the next 3 to 6 months. We're going to survey you. I'm going to do lots of one-on-one interviews with everybody on the team. So I did like, 50 to 100 calls.
Okay.
Zoom calls with everybody. Probably going back to my standard questionnaire type approach is what I talked about earlier. And I just got to know everyone and figure out, like, what do you like? What do you dislike? Why did you come here? What do you like about this company? What didn't you like about the other companies that you came from? Do you think core values are important or not? And it took months, but I synthesized all of that survey data and the subjective data, everything, into a presentation that said, then I mirrored it back at the group.
Yep.
And I said, this is what you told me you care about. And I'm creating five pillars, 5 buckets that I think, should, that this sort of, we can group these things into core values. Does this sound right to you? Mm-hmm. And everybody was like, yeah, that sounds amazing. I was like, okay, so that was like the genesis for how we eventually established what our core values are and the language we use to describe ourselves. And then we use that to recreate our website. So that way, from this point, the goal was, before we announced Immortals of Aveum, we needed that in place, because at that point now we're public. We had been like in stealth mode for so long, the studio was, that it's like, okay, now if you learn about us because you learned about Immortals of Aveum and you like follow that breadcrumb trail and you're like, oh, who are the people making this? We are representing ourselves publicly in a very honest, true, vulnerable way.
And it's really, it's clear as well, because as someone that has gone through that exact track of hearing about the studio via hearing about the game and being like, who are these people? And then going onto the website and seeing some of the stuff that you've put out, and we'll talk more about that in a moment.
Sure.
But seeing, there's a banner that unites all these people that is very deliberate. This is not, we make games, the end.
Just because,
exactly,
because games are fun.
Because we're a company that makes games, so of course we make games. No, with you guys, there's clearly a lot more intention there, which from the outset has intrigued me. Because I look at a studio, I might look at a studio that is making a new game, not know anything about them, go on the website, see no interesting information that sort of defines them separately to the other dozen studios that I might be looking at in a given however long. And with you guys, I felt that DNA was more clear, and it means that there's already room for more connection as a creator when I'm like, okay, these aren't just sort of faceless people that are making a game, but actually there's a human on the other end of it, which I really, really like.
Well, thank you for saying that. That means a lot, because we've put in a lot of effort to do that. And, we did it for ourselves. We didn't do it for anyone else. We did it for ourselves. But I knew that eventually when we started to talk about our game and people were then researching who we are, that it would be important that they understood who we really are, whether they like that or not. But at least we were being honest to ourselves. And also from a recruitment perspective, I do think having had the opportunity or the honor, I don't know what you would say. I was very lucky that every job I've taken, I was choosing them. I was running toward an opportunity. I've never found myself in a position where I was like flat out of work and just desperate for a paycheck. Mm-hmm. And I know that's maybe atypical, but I'd like to think that even if I was like, I need to find my next paycheck, ultimately, it's like you're getting into a relationship with your employer, and it's important to know that your personal values are aligned with at least some of the values of the company, right? So that you'll fit in.
Yep.
I just think that we're like in a post-COVID world where a lot of us did a lot of reflecting on ourselves during that time, that like you don't want to compromise who you are as a person. Like, people are starting to stand up for themselves and realize that like this, like who I am matters, and I need to. I'm not just going to conform to a company culture. I need that company culture to actually match my inner self. And so
100%.
Yeah. So
and in many ways, that's, I think, a big motivator for why so many folks are becoming creators these days as well, right? Is they enter these workplaces where there's so much dissonance there.
Yeah.
There isn't that alignment, and they're like, well, if I can't get this externally right now, I'm going to do it internally instead.
Yes. Yeah, it's a great
that's
opportunity.
definitely been a big
So
change.
as we one day hopefully expand as a studio, and we could bring on other teams and work on multiple projects. Hopefully, if we can be a success, first things first, we just got to make Immortals a success. But future proof planning. Let's say all things go well. Well, cool. Now we already have all that other stuff in place, right?
So as part of all of that, you've defined your values and you sort of figured out, okay, I have pretty much open road here and all the sort of executive approval you need to implement all the building blocks, the foundations of an influence marketing strategy. EA are also involved.
Yeah.
So you're working with EA. Talk to me about, first of all, what that relationship is, and then how they've kind of been part of your influencer strategies.
Okay, yeah. So Ascendant Studios, for those that don't know, because we're a new studio, right? So Ascendant Studios, we're an independent AAA video game developer. We completely own our IP, Immortals of Aveum. So we're a self-funded studio. We have our own investor. So we have paid for the entire development of our game and our studio and all of that. But we knew, and Brett knew, that in order to bring out a AAA product this large, we needed somebody that could help us put together a AAA marketing team. Right. And my team internally, we're a team of 5 people, so that's pretty good, better than what I actually anticipated. Coming into the studio, because we're kind of a scrappy startup just trying to put out our first game. So we signed with EA for a publishing and marketing distribution deal, and so they bring all the might and muscle that they have and the experience that they have to the table for marketing this thing on a global scale, as well as the budget we need to help actually market this thing.
Right.
And so, yeah, that partnership, the studio was courted by quite a lot of different publishers that were very interested in the game, but EA was the most excited and probably the most qualified to put this thing out at the global scale that we needed to put it out. And so we've done the deal with them. They've been fantastic partners. I don't think we could, you and I just came from our big preview event, here in San Francisco at EA's headquarters yesterday. We would not have been able to do that on our own.
Right. So the context on that is that you had, how many creators do you reckon were there?
I think we had something like 60-ish creators. There was about 120, 130 people total. But it was a mix of traditional press and content creators.
And so we all flew in,
Yes.
and we've been here for a couple of days, and we got to play the game for a couple of hours. There was opportunity to speak to devs, either just sort of off the record, off to the side, or on camera. There were interviews. It was an entire little warehouse, basically, of content creator activity for the entire day. And this is something that, in my experience, because I've done probably, hard to actually put a number on it. Let's sort of put a rough estimate of 50 of these sorts of events in various different forms over the years. I think the first event that I did that was a kind of creator meet in-person event was probably in 2013 or 14. And at one point, I was just in an agency's office in London. I was playing a game early.
Real lo-fi.
Literally their sort of back room. They just set up a PS5, or at that point it was something else, something much earlier. But the range of these events can scale massively. The one yesterday was a pretty big, large scale event.
Yeah.
You had also all sort of territories, as far as I'm aware, at least, all here under one roof, which doesn't always happen, and that's, I'm sure, got its own challenges. But EA facilitated all of that. So EA were the host of the event. We were at the EA Redwood Shores office. And so I imagine that side of things, where they can say, okay, you guys have a vision for what you want to do, and you've got these values that have inspired these choices, and the way that you want to execute these is crystal clear. We can facilitate it, right? We can 100%. Be the operator that makes that happen, or helps make it happen.
Yeah, so the way our relationship works, which is fantastic, and to be clear, for anybody that's listening and is in game dev or pup, is a game developer, we're working specifically with the EA Originals label within EA. They're a fantastic group that's very much, their whole focus is to basically empower independent developers to come up with really cool, creative, original ideas. It's literally in the name of their brand, right? EA Originals. And so, and I definitely think that Immortals of Aveum falls under that banner. And so, as part of that, everything that we do, all the trailers that we make, the key art, the front of box, you name it, all the way down to what wall art was on that, was hanging on the walls and how the venue would look. all of that gets run through the studio and run through me. And so we have a very active hand in the creation of the marketing of our game. However, it's like a massive undertaking to actually execute all of that. Like you can come up with, it's one thing to come up with a marketing strategy. It all sounds great on paper. When you go to execute it, you need a lot of arms and legs to do that, right? And also, one of the benefits of having a group like EA is, I love it when people who are smarter than me can also add their ideas to the strategies and add their ideas and recommendations. And so it's a pretty amazingly successful partnership in that they value our input, they ask for our input, and everything ultimately then, even ideas that they come up with, they all get routed back through us for approval anyway.
Right.
So it's like excellent in that way. As far as like creators go, so John Linesco, who runs their creator team for our game, in his group, and I think they partner with Ben Agency here in the United States at least.
Yeah, they do some stuff in the UK too.
Yeah, okay, in the UK. So there's a team of experts that understand the space really well, and I've worked with some of them in my past life, and so they're putting, they put together a list of recommended creators, people they feel like, again, not just reach, but very much focus on relevancy. This person will be, probably be interested in this game. They play single player first person shooters, or they play single player action, adventure games. So we're not inviting people that are, like CS:GO PvP specialists, and are in the PvP Valorant scene or whatever, because unless they're playing, story-driven games on the side, it's probably just not going to be their cup of tea, right? So they do all that work, but then they'll send the list to us and we'll vet through it. We added a bunch of people that my team and I work with and have good partnerships with, and I think that's actually how we got connected.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, it's through Jason. Somebody on our team was like, "Oh, I'm working with Milo. Could you partner together?" Yeah. And I was like, "Hell yeah!" I know I've worked with you in the past on other games on like Borderlands, so I was like, "Yeah, we should make sure he gets added onto the list." So,
right. So it's a collaborative effort there in terms of curation, and then obviously deployment of everything in person, getting everyone in the same place, and means that you're doing a little less herding sheep,
100%.
I expect, and can focus on what you need to be doing in order to market the game as effectively as you can, right?
100%. And then, so the other half of the story then is like, what does my studio team do, right? So our studio marketing team, aside from being like basically integrated in with like as part of, like you could view us as almost an additional marketing discipline within EA. Like we join all the same meetings amongst the different discipline teams there. So we're, in lame business terms, we're a stakeholder like a bunch of other teams. In addition to that, though, there's an entire suite of sort of like studio marketing focused efforts and content that we create and put out on our Ascendant Studios company channels that have nothing to do with Immortals of Aveum, and have everything to do with just building what we hope will be, this long-lasting brand that is Ascendant Studios that stands apart from the products that we envision we create in the future, Immortals of Aveum being the first.
Right, and that is fascinating to me, because it's so, and forgive my wording here, it's so weird.
Okay.
And I love that it's so weird, because it's something I've been yelling at different publishers and different studios and individual developers and sort of chewing their ears out, saying, wouldn't it be cool if you did this? And they've been like, well, yes, but X, but Y, but Z, red tape here and approval there and legal here and all those sorts of things. But you guys are just doing it. Yep. And so when I first saw the studio and saw the game and then saw the studio, I really distinctly remember going onto the YouTube channel for Ascendant Studios and seeing videos about Dead Space and seeing videos about a variety of other things that weren't your immediate product. And I was like, oh, that is in itself already a win as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, thank you.
But then also within that, you're so smartly, and I love the fact that this is something that you're putting resourcing behind, trying to weave in the story of, like, for example, these developers that have worked on all these games. You're weaving that in, you're bringing it to its natural conclusion here with Immortals of Aveum, so it makes sense that the past is leading to the present, like that is established, but it isn't constantly, but how do we make this Immortals of Aveum only? Or
how do we sell you
sort
Immortals?
And I'm sort of effusive about that. I love the fact that that's something that you're really putting a lot of energy behind. And it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, that would have been something that you would have pitched, and Brett and the other folks at the studio would have essentially been like, let's try it, man.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. I mean, again, hats off to our leadership, Brett, Spencer, Kevin Boyle. They recognized that it was an unorthodox idea, but they saw the potential in where it could go, and very little downside because we have a publishing group, in EA that's going to help us with the marketing of the game. So in theory, my team should have the bandwidth to also be able to do this on the side, and it won't impact getting the marketing done on the game. If we didn't have a publisher, if I came in and I was charged with self-publishing and we were going to build out a large marketing apparatus to execute all of that the way that a 2K or an EA or Activision would do, it's possible we just wouldn't have had the bandwidth to do this. But that's not how it all played out. And I think the major difference here, right, for me, and as I think back, like these ideas that we're now executing here at Ascendant Studios, like I had and pitched these ideas 8 years ago at 2K.
Wow. Okay.
And we could just never get it done because it was always in direct conflict with the underlying business needs of a giant publisher, which is revenue and providing value to shareholders, right? And so in order to do that, everything, all resources have to be held accountable to driving the bottom line revenue and selling games, and so quite simplistically, in my old life, it's like you pitch an idea and it ultimately gets distilled down to, can you justify how or show me how this will sell a single copy of the game?
Right, yeah.
And oftentimes your good ideas, you'd be like, well, no, I won't be able to do that. But, if we can create a connection with our audience and, there's loyalty and trust there and love, then theoretically that will then pay off down the line because then they'll love us and they'll want to buy more stuff. And they'll, for those games where we have microtransactions, they won't feel so bad about giving more money after they've already spent $70 on something.
And then they throw the source, I made it up meme at you and you're like, well, it's there, I promise.
Totally. And so look, no shade at all to 2K or any other major corporation.
Of course.
It's just a different world. And I think the benefit I had in coming here and pitching these ideas is that this is a creative studio. We're led by a creative mastermind who, made Dead Space and wrote stories for Call of Duty and directed that stuff and is creative lead first. He's a game designer and a creative director. He's not a businessman. He's learning how to be a businessman right now, like running his own studio. It's a necessity of owning your own company. But he'd be the first to tell you that that's his new frontier, right? And so I'm just so fortunate to that we have the empowerment here from leadership on down to do this. The thinking behind it all. So, like I said earlier, we think of ourselves and we talk about ourselves as a creator company, and what I've said, it's a bit of a paradigm shift, but like we aren't selling a product, we are the product.
Right.
Like we, as the creators, view ourselves and the content we are making as the product. And the goal, what I mean by that is like we have a podcast, it's called Rise Above. It's focused on showcasing really genius, very experienced game developers with storied careers. And the goal of it is to provide wisdom and experience and knowledge and just share their experiences throughout the course of their career, all the things that they've learned, because yes, we know they're successful, but usually successful people have failed a lot along the way, and they learn things from that and they grow from their failures, and that's how they end up being successful. That's at least in my experience, oftentimes what I've observed. And so the podcast kind of aims at, taking these people that have storied careers, breaking down their origin stories. Like, where did you come from? How did you get into it? What did your parents think about gaming? How did you even land into games? And then how did you eventually get to where you are now? And doing it in a way that passes along that knowledge to not only, hopefully, fellow game developers who listen and watch, because it's video and audio, but also aspiring game developers, like the next generation. Like, that really motivates us to think that young kids in college or in high school who might be thinking, or I have, young boys who are, 7 and 4. My 7-year-old is starting to think about how, he keeps asking me, can we make games in Roblox? Like, so we're in Roblox Studios designing stuff together that, super jank stuff, but it's getting his wheels turning that, oh, maybe this is a career path. Maybe I could do this if it's fun. Being able to pass on, the wisdom and knowledge to those people, to a younger generation, and help them understand the path to get into games. That's just one of the ideas, one of the products that we make. We have a YouTube channel where we do video essays. That was like where you said the Dead Space one, right? Like how game designers tell great stories was one episode Zach did.
For context, Zach is a contractor that you brought in to help manage this stuff, or how does it?
Correct. Yeah, so Zach is a contractor, contract employee with us. He's a YouTuber, right? So you may know him as Ghost Robo. He was made a YouTube channel. He's been a YouTuber for 13 years now, I think, or 14 years. Ghost Robo was one of his primary channels for a long time. Switch Force is his others now. He's like almost 500,000 subscribers. A Switch focused channel. He and I had worked together for a long time and had been talking about these ideas for a long time. And finally I was in a position where I could say like, okay, dude, let's do this. And
That's so cool. That is so cool. You just went to someone from the community that you had a pre-existing relationship with. You already knew that they were doing this all the time.
Totally.
And were like, we know you make good stuff.
Yes.
Let's make good stuff together.
100%.
Like, I love it.
And then Tess on my team is a career streamer, a Twitch streamer for 9 years. We met at PAX East, years ago in Battleborn in 2016. And we ended up staying close. Like while I was at 2K, I had hired Tess to run a couple podcasts for us on the Borderlands channel. So she was part of a lot of our owned channel Borderlands content, which was unique for that.
Like
the company at the time.
stuff.
Bordercast. She would guest spot on the Borderlands show, which I had contracted with Greg Miller and Kind of Funny Games to produce. So
again, same sort of situation.
Same situation, right? Like she was starting to bridge the gap between independent content creation on her own channel and doing the same thing, but doing it for the company on their owned channels. And so eventually when I came here, I was like, why don't you come in-house with me? So she's a full-time salaried employee with us. And just leading the content creation effort. So she's our full-time host, producer, and editor for the Rise Above podcast that I spoke about.
Yeah.
And so the point anyway of all of this is that we're trying to, with these products, if you will, different content products, we're trying to build an audience of people that follow us and care about us for us. You know what I mean? Going back to what I said about like, instead of my team being focused on selling a product or marketing a product, being the game Immortals of Aveum, like that's what we have a publisher for. They're doing that. Yes, we're heavily involved in it, but like they're focused on game marketing and selling the thing that we're going to sell to get revenue for the company. We are focused, at my team on creating ourselves, our brand Ascendant in the 125 people that make up this company as a personality and a product of itself. Right. So it's very much creator-driven philosophy, but it was like, it turned it on its head. It's like, what if it wasn't one person who's got a personality and is the product, or even 4 people that make up a group like Eric's Gaming's channel, they've got a bunch of personalities. It's like, what if it's a studio of people, but we have 1 or 2 faces that we can like use that as a platform to put more of our developers in front of the world, bring in friends and family and other devs that that we're friends with or that we partner with, and put them on there, So like we have an episode with Paul Hellquist. Paul and I went way back working on Borderlands 2 together. He was the creative director on Borderlands 2 at Gearbox, and he was also the lead designer on the original BioShock.
Right.
And now he runs his own independent AAA studio called Stray Kite Studios.
Right.
And so they're very similar to us, like down in Dallas, a group of, I think like 60 or so people who, work on Fortnite stuff. They made Dragon's Keep, Return on Dragon's Keep, like the standalone pack. It's like, dude, Paul, you've been in the industry a long time and done amazing things. Let's talk about your journey, right?
So all these things allow you then to not only, like the sort of cynical view is you make a podcast about video games, you get some other devs on, and then you build a sort of connection and you hire them in a year, right? So like there's this sort of cynical view there, but then you realize, oh, hold on though, if we're sharing like these people's creative ideas and the way that they're doing things, we're learning from them just as much as they might be learning from us and building a connection with us. And that exchange of ideas goes across studios now where, as you said, like his studio has got a very similar sort of DNA to you guys, and you're united within Ascendant under sort of the banner of the values you've created, but you're also then recognizing you've got these kind of like allied states almost around you that a resource that I'm sure you sort of can tap just as much as you would hit up a friend at any other studio any other time and be like, I'm working on this thing, how do you guys do this? And exchange ideas and all that sort of stuff. So it's this creative melting pot that I think by not doing it, you miss so much.
I agree.
And I think studios are really going to go in that direction more as they probably start to either have similar setups to how you guys are working with EA to handle one massive side of things, and then you're creating your own internal output and owned media, etc.
Yes.
I can only see that growing and getting bigger. I am really curious, as you've done that and as you've tried to experiment and figure out what works with that owned media and things along those lines, as I understand things, in the roadmap of a marketing calendar, figuring out your key marketing beats with a game, you'd essentially be like, well, we think we're going to launch in X time, and we're currently at some time, let's say it's 2 years before.
Right.
So we'll figure out what assets we might be able to make in that time as marketing beats, and we'll sort of work backwards, right, from launch back. And that might be a beta, that might be a trailer, that might be all sorts of different potential things that could fill that calendar. You guys are, in a slightly new sense, generating a bunch of quite, and I don't want to say low effort, but it's certainly smaller workload and more narrowly focused projects. Like a video, you might be able to turn around in a couple of weeks or something, compared to a trailer that's going to be months and months and months in dev, right?
Yeah.
So how has that affected your vision for your marketing calendar, and how have you been kind of approaching that side of things?
It's a great question. And I think on the marketing side for the game, you still do have long leads for big assets, right? For big trailers that are going to come out. So we still have to manage those long lead deadlines. But on the studio focused content, we have found that we've been able to be very nimble. So one thing that we noticed in the very beginning, with Immortals of Aveum is that, we came out and we're very different. We look very different. We sound very different. You really haven't seen a game quite like this since probably '97 with like Hexen and Heretic.
Right. Yeah.
It was a long time. Some people weren't even born then when they're seeing this stuff on TikTok these days. So how do you educate people on a game that is quite deep and has quite a lot of systems working together, and we can't show all of that stuff in a 2 or 3 minute trailer, and so you see it and you see flashing magic and you see quite a lot of really beautiful cinematics, but you're not able to talk about RPG progression systems. You're not allowed to talk about all the gear systems. You're not allowed to talk about all the NPC conversations, the hub town stuff, like all the things that make this game, a 25 to 30 hour campaign experience, a 40 to 50 hour total experience if you were to play through all the nooks and crannies and go explore all the side content. Like, it's just so much to talk about. You can't get across in a 3 minute trailer. So Zach and Tess, there's video already on our YouTube channel. It's just we call it Gameplay Deep Dive.
Yep.
And our goal with that was to just make this accessible to people the way that a good YouTube video is. 2 personalities who understand the game, going back and forth, just telling you, hey, here's what the game is all about. And you can accomplish that in 5 minutes or less. It's done in the same style as a YouTube content creator would do, instead of a corporate-y, kind of like overly narrated, overly polished asset, and we're getting amazing responses to it. And so we've now decided with EA and their social team, like, we're turning that into a series. And so we've put out like boot camp video series. That content is quick turn. Like, we can make that content in like a week and a half.
Right. Yeah.
Like, and that's only actually, probably could do it faster, but like when you're working with large companies, there's lots of loops to jump through. There's legal approvals, there's ESRB approvals, there's all kinds of stuff that you have to do to get a marketing asset for a video game out the door, which at the end of the day, no matter how community driven or focused your asset is, it's considered a marketing asset anyway, even if it doesn't look or sound like it.
Yep.
So that stuff is pretty quick turn, and I don't know that we would have been able to do that kind of stuff in my past life as effectively, because we wouldn't have had the right people in place.
Right.
You would have been like, oh, who am I going to go partner with for this? And so my solution on the Borderlands side was like, okay, I'll hire a couple people from within the community to be the hosts of this show, and we'll outsource it to them. And we were actually quite hands off on that. Anyway, the other thing that I think we're actively thinking of that has to do with the creator economy, the creator marketplace, is our cadence of content on our channels needs to reflect and mirror what it would be like if we were just independent creators. So rather than, and this is a paradigm shift in a marketer's thinking, the game, when you're marketing a video game, you're thinking about what major trailers am I putting out? When am I putting them out? What else is happening around me? Like, what other games are launching or doing reviews, or, that might stomp out my noise because it's too noisy and I can't break through, right? Or how do we compete, at E3 when you got all these, especially this year, when you got all these different games. So much thought goes into timing and the right asset and the right time. And there's an immense amount of money and effort that goes into that. None of that helps you build a channel.
Right.
No, so think about it from like the creator. If you are an independent content creator listening right now, I probably don't have to tell you, like, your upload cadence matters, right? Like how you engage in the comments of your video or not matters to how your channel builds, what the algorithm thinks of you and how it recommends you. That is really difficult to do for if you're a big company marketing a big multi-million-dollar game. You're thinking about, how do I sell this thing?
Yeah.
Not how do I build a following on my social channels. Like the social channels are a mechanism to sell the thing. That's not how we think at Ascendant. Right. Like the marketing content we're creating for our studio, we're talking actively about, is this a bi-weekly show? Is it a weekly show? Like how quickly can we produce this with the limited assets and people that we have, resources that we have? And, so what we landed on right now is our podcast, Rise Above, is a bi-weekly show. And we record lots of episodes because we do lots of interviews. We record them and then they start to go through the editing production pipeline. But we chose to do it on a bi-weekly cadence because we weren't quite sure if we could maintain weekly, and we didn't want to set an expectation. Overpromise and underdeliver. So then in the in-between periods of that, then it's like, okay, Zach's got a video essay on how do game designers tell great stories or whatever. And now increasingly, because we're in the middle of our marketing period for Immortals of Aveum, we've got Immortals of Aveum content in there that's like a little more dev personality driven, and it's starting to we fill in the gaps with that. But that keeps our upload cadence on YouTube going. It keeps our upload cadence on TikTok going.
And so from a creator's perspective, for someone like myself, I, over the years, have had various studios that I've sort of attached myself to, like a little limpet that's sort of jumped in there and said, okay, like I'm gonna cover everything that you guys do, whatever it might be, whether it's a tweet, an Insta story, a Snapchat story at one point. There was a whole marketing campaign around Snapchat, all those sorts of things. That's my bread and butter, day to day. But then you would have periods where it's like, okay, we don't have a game coming out for 3 years, so we're not gonna post for 2 years.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, hello?
Yeah, totally.
What?
Why? I know.
And so to be making proactive moves to be filling that space and saying, sure, the game itself, maybe we release a game and then maybe there's some number of years before another game can be released or whatever.
Yes.
And so in that time, typically, you would just have this radio silence period because it's like, well, we don't have anything to show you yet.
Channel goes dead.
But you do because the studio is still there, the people are still there, the hard work is still being done, and there is, as exactly as you said, a product there in itself that isn't just the end result of the video game that is worth maintaining, and that relationship is worth maintaining. Yeah. And so for someone like myself looking at a studio to attach myself to, there are obviously 1,000,001 reasons why I might or might not decide to make a video on a certain game. Right. But if I'm looking at the bigger picture and saying, career-wise, what do I want out of this year or this next 5 years? I'm so much more likely to say, well, let's say you had a much smaller studio, right? And let's say you didn't have nearly as much strong developer heritage and the product that you were making was much more of an unknown quantity. I would still be so much more aligned with what you guys were doing if I knew that you shared the same visions and the same values that I have in terms of you need to be present. You need to be having some kind of output so that even if I'm getting less views, I can be regular and I can make my career fit this sort of moving machine that doesn't just disappear on me every sort of 2 years, 3 years or whatever.
Exactly.
So I think it's incredibly powerful that you guys are doing that. Is there a fear that, like, obviously right now you have a game coming out.
Yes.
And that means that there's a huge amount of other work to do, I'm sure. You know, sort of resources are really sort of spread between all these different hats that you need to wear. Did you wait until a certain point before so maybe 6 months out from release or something, to turn on that machine and say, okay, this is when the channel goes into overdrive? Or was it like, well, we just needed time to get the resources figured out and now it will continue like that indefinitely? What was that choice?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So we actually put a lot of thought into that, and we knew we wanted to do two things. We knew we wanted, once we started to publish, we needed to continue to publish, right? Because I've naturally, as we talked about, I've been embedded in the creator economy for a long time. The ongoing conversation of can you ever take a break? What happens when I take a break? My channel suffers, all that stuff, especially if you're on Twitch. So because I know the nature of the beast of these platforms, I'm like, once we turn on, we kind of have to stay on. Unless we're going to give up and pivot to something else.
Sure, of course.
Then it's fine, we can throw in the towel. But if we want to be successful, we have to keep going. And also, we knew we wanted to align what we were doing as a studio with our content for the game. so that like, because listen, I mean, we're not lighting the earth on fire or the world on fire with the content we're making on our studio channels right now, because we're still an unknown entity. Like no one's played our game. They know, if you know of us, you've heard of maybe you've heard of the pedigree of the other games our groups have worked, our team has worked on. But we are very honest about the fact that, like, of course, this game, we need to prove ourselves. Like, people will judge Immortals of Aveum for what it is, and we hope that they love it, and I think that they will. And when they do, ideally, at that point, we'll have had a little bed there, a foundational bed of evergreen content about us. It's people-focused. That's a creative outlet for our creative expression of self as a studio. That then you can go down that rabbit hole and start to maybe make a connection with us. It really all comes back to making connection with people. People connect with people. People don't necessarily connect with product.
Right.
And so if you can stay connected to the people that make the products you love and actually feel a sense of connection to them the same way people feel connected to content creators that they subscribe to and follow and love.
And also feel like that with sports teams and all these other...
100%. Great example, yeah. Then, now we've got something that we can build on over the course of time. Because you're right, what happens in the multiple years after Immortals of Aveum while we work on what comes next? Mm-hmm. Do we just go dark? Do we just, hell, life would be a lot easier for me if that was the case, Like I just kick back, I got no work to do, I'm just gonna pontificate about what we could do in the future.
Yeah.
But I think the theory is, and this is the scary part, man, and like it goes all the way back to the beginning of our conversation of, I always feel like I'm out over the edge with visions for things that are untested and pitching ideas that I don't know whether it's going to work or not. And I'm fortunate to work at a place that believes in it and empowers it. But the theory is, right, if we can continue to build connection with an audience of fellow developers as well as folks like yourself who are creators and gamers who care about the people behind the scenes that make these things, well then cool. The next time I have something to sell, a new game, a sequel or whatever, we can weave that into the content that we're already making in an authentic way. And so it doesn't have to be overtly like salesy. It could just be like, oh, by the way, we know you listen to our podcast for all the great insights that, our guests provide. But also Ascendant Studios is like, we just announced our latest game and you can go check that out if you're interested in it over here.
Right.
Right. I know in my heart from experiencing it with other great content creators that already do this every day with their audiences. That's how sponsorships work. It's why influencer marketing or the creator economy even works and is viable in the first place.
Right. I think it's
so we're just duplicating that, but as a company and positioning it as like, we are a group of creators and we have so much creativity and we need an outlet to express it.
Right.
In between, especially in between those years when you're dark and you don't have a new video game to talk about.
Yeah. It's very much, I think you've recognized from your past lives working in the industry that ultimately, if things are inorganic, they aren't going to work, right? If the content creator is having to lie through their teeth to promote the product, whatever it might be, there's just going to be too much friction there, and you're going to get so much less bang for your buck. Even if that's what the execs think they want, that's not what they want. Like they want results, and that's how you get results, is making it organic. And I think from what I've seen, what you're doing is the terrifying thing, but also I think definitely going in the right direction of saying, if it's going to be organic, we need to be organic in our output too. We can't just be, we only put out the polished asset and then we go dark for 9 months and then it's one other marketing beat and then we sort of go dark again. But rather it's, we're going to go through all those difficult processes the content creators themselves are going through in trying to attach to various projects, etc. And find a way to make things work and build connections and build an audience just as on the content side folks like myself would do.
Nailed it.
And I think that attention to building that organic relationship as opposed to one that is purely a marketing lens or through a marketing lens is where in time it's going to pay off. And it's again one of those things where it's like this nebulous, how exactly do we measure this right now? But I think that the efforts are going to speak for themselves over time. I think that's definitely the direction it's going.
Thanks. That makes me feel good that you feel that way because, all of this is unproven, right? And maybe it won't work and we'll figure it out. We'll pivot if we have to. But one of what success looks like, I think, for me, long haul and for our team, aside from the obvious of like, hopefully we have a game that sells well and all of that, is that because we're independent, like fiercely independent, and we have so many thoughts of our own in this industry. And when you work at a major corporation, like you kind of have to mind your P's and Q's. Like there's a lot of red tape around what, obviously, and secrecy and what can and can't be said. Like I was just talking about this at the event with somebody yesterday. You know, there's a lot of misinformation and just like lack of education on that gamers have. There's like assumptions of this is how things work in the industry that are wrong. But nobody bothers to talk about that. And it's not like, look, I have no offense to anybody that you only know what you know.
Of course.
You know, and if someone within the industry who understands how the industry works is incapable or not allowed to talk about it, well, then we're doing everybody a disservice. Like, we're keeping gamers in the dark. We're dehumanizing ourselves and focusing only on product, right? You know what I mean? Like, you're only focused on selling a product. You're not focusing on the human beings behind the product. There's just a massive disconnect. It causes a massive disconnect unintentionally. I hope that our group can start to remedy that and also give confidence and voice to other independent developers who are no longer afraid to talk about the things that are, I guess were off limits to talk about before. Because I think it's only then that you're going to get enough education of like how this industry really works and the things that really matter to developers, and even just reasons for like, why didn't the game ship with X, Y, or Z? It's like there's an answer for that.
Right.
And if your shackles are off, you can talk about it
to
some degree. So you know, my hope is that when we have time to breathe after July 20th and the game launches, that, you know, if there's any creators out there that have shows that want to bring guests on, like, we want to talk about that stuff, and we want to collaborate with other independent developers, you know, who want to make that kind of content too, and just enjoy and celebrate our love of gaming. And if we can learn stuff along the way about each other and about the industry and about how things work, like, then that's all the better.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, I can't count the number of times I've said to myself and said to other creator friends I have, there'll be some outrage. I could name 1,000,001 of them. I'll pick the puddle situation for the Spider-Man game, Spider-Man PS4, where in a trailer, a puddle had reflections that looked one way, and then in the game, people compared it, and they were like, the puddle looks different. Like, what the hell, right?
Oh my God.
One of those sorts of situations. And I saw that blowing up, and I saw all the conversation online, and it's so often, and again, exactly as you said, this is no offense to people that don't know what they don't know, but you'd have one person sort of loudly proclaiming, like, this is bad, and it shows this, like they've made an inference, right? And then you have other people that admittedly also don't know, being like, well, maybe it's this other thing, like let's either defend the developers here, or let's explain it for some other reason, or whatever, right? And it means that you have this cacophony of people weighing in on this situation who most of the time they're one step removed from the answer. And the answer is easy.
They lack the expertise necessary to talk about it in a helpful way. Yeah.
So you get these situations, and so it's driven me insane over the years when I've been covering. I personally didn't cover that game, but in games that I have been covering, I'll sit down and say, okay, we've been having crashing in the game for the last couple of weeks, for example, right? Or some other issue has been present. There's a bug or there's an exploit. And I'll sort of post content, because that's what I do, saying the community's rolled up about this. We're all sort of upset. We need to be communicated with right now. All that needs to happen is a dev just needs to sit down and honestly, and I recognize that there's layers to this, because community managers get personally attacked, and it's this whole sort of thing. But the management of your relationship with your community in that way is so crucial, and so often devs will choose the road, and devs maybe is unfair, but publishers as well, and everyone in that space will choose silence as opposed to trying to initiate the conversation in good faith, because they know that the internet obviously takes things in bad faith so often, and they have their reasons not to, the red tape, etc. So the fact that you're working to try and cut some of that red tape a little bit and break down some of those walls is going to be a service to the entire industry.
I hope so.
Because it's going to mean that if there is some instance in your game where someone loads in and every character is sort of walking 50 feet in the air instead of on the ground or something, and it's
there's
like,
a reason for that.
That wasn't in the trailer, right?
Totally.
You can have a conversation about it, and it can be a point of learning instead of a point of purely frustration with no ability to sort of vent it because you feel like you're not being listened to.
1000%, and I'll take it one step further in that. Yes, if it can clear up really easy conversations about things like the puddle, for example, I immediately was like, oh, I bet Tyler, who, you know, is one of our lead producers on our game, but he was a producer on Spider-Man.
Okay.
Like, I bet Tyler knows.
Yeah.
You could just tell us, I bet he lived it, you know?
Yeah.
Or, you know, you can get one of the lighting guys on your team to help explain why the lighting is different in this versus that. So not only could it settle conversations right then and there about something that is unnecessarily charged topic, but look, if somebody learns something in the process and it inspires them to want to learn Unreal Engine and start making games on their own, like, well, that's what it's all about, you know?
Yep.
So I think that's a huge motivating factor for us as a studio is we've got a lot of people who are sort of like in the middle to end stages of their career that are heavily inspired, heavily experienced, and really motivated to want to share what they know. And if it helps others get their start, that's mission success, right? Mission
icing on the
accomplished.
cake, for sure. Okay, so you're breaking down those barriers, and in an ideal world, some folks learn some things about game development and the entire process. They go on to learn Unreal or just get into the industry in some way. Many of those people may actually just end up going in the content creation direction as well.
They might.
And you guys have done something really interesting with this that EA has some experience with, and I've had some experience with EA too, in bringing in creators pretty early in the process to talk to about how to make the game better and what their communities might need and all these sorts of things.
Yep.
I would love for you to give a quick outline of what that program was, and then we can talk more about how that's sort of gone for you.
Yeah, no, 100%. So it's becoming increasingly common practice, which I think is great. And so for anybody out there that works in creator relations but doesn't have this at their company, I would suggest it. And I would suggest it for other, even just outside the games industry.
Yeah.
So EA calls it their community council, and we have one for Immortals of Aveum. They have them for most games, where it's a group of content creators. And for ours, we specifically tried to pick creators with different backgrounds and different expertise. So some creators are variety gamers that play lots of different games and are a bit more casual in the way they just act with their audiences. They don't pretend to be like esport level experts at any games. They're mostly entertainers who enjoy games, and people are there for their personality, not so much the games that they're playing. But because they sample lots of games, they have a lot of experience playing lots of different kinds of games. So that's some folks. Other folks might play, they play games more competitively and are multiplayer focused. Other folks, we've definitely got a couple people on the team that are very specifically, we wanted them there because they are the kind of person that plays looter shooters and games where you can min-max your build and try to find like game-breaking builds or just like most overpowered builds. And they're just very good at that. They're like, their mind just works in that way. We wanted them to hear from them because we have a lot of those progression systems in our game. And we're a single player, so we don't care if you have game-breaking builds and stuff. In fact, it might be cool if you're like super overpowered battle mage, wipes the floor. Like that's great for the power fantasy, mage type game that we are. But we wanted them to make sure at least we weren't making a game that felt like too boring of that system. You know what I mean?
Yeah, not deep enough.
Yeah, deep enough. Yeah, exactly. And then, also some just like sort of like media / creator hybrid podcast type folks that, see things more critically through like what a critic's lens might be. And you get all those people in a room. And I mean, honestly, you give it a cool name like Creator Council, or at 2K, we called them our team, our creator teams. We have, the 2K has a network called the Next Makers Creator Network. And, within that few thousand creators that are in it, you would have smaller 12 to 15 person creator teams that we made per game, right? And those folks were focused on specific brands that that they love and that they create content on. So they're almost like the ambassadors to the community of those games. So you use them in a different way where they get to deepen their relationship with the developer and be a conduit to the community. So, and I know that games, like Bungie has this with Destiny. There's a lot of other, anyone who's doing a good live service game should have this if they don't already, right? And so we're not reinventing the wheel, but what's interesting is like, we give it all these fancy names. It really is focus testing has been happening in marketing forever.
Right.
Since like the Mad Men era of advertising, but this is a little different. It's a lot different. The key differentiating factor goes back to relationships. Like on focus tests in marketing, you have almost like anonymous people that are focus testing, and you never see them again when they're done with your focus test. That happens too on games. It's just user testing. This is relationship driven in that you stick with this group throughout the entire campaign and then possibly into the future, right? And hopefully, ideally, it's mutually beneficial. They're not just helping give you ideas for the game, but they're also then able to create content from that relationship, and it benefits their channel and their audience as well. And if you become, hopefully when Immortals of Aveum is successful and there's a burgeoning community around it, these people can be sort of frontline ambassadors within the community.
For sure. And I think the really good thing about it not being an anonymous situation, not being just a traditional focus test, is that it recognizes also that as content creators, just as the developers are living their own game every single day, they're constantly jumping in and replaying levels and trying to make sure that everything is placed right, and we've talked about that, and are very, very close to the product. As a content creator, it's, in many instances, not always, but in many instances, our jobs to be similarly deep, but with the front-facing view of a handful of products potentially. And so in some ways can act as tastemakers for what our audiences are gravitating to at certain times, because that's our incentive system as well. We're incentivized to cover the things where the conversation is moving. And so if we can recognize that in the same way that that product that you mentioned, Spike Tap or something along those lines.
Spike Trap.
Spike Trap did previously, but we're doing it through specifically a content creator lens now, following that conversation, and can then bring that to you guys and say, okay, well, I can distill this based on the fact that I'm having to make content to serve these needs anyway. That is so different to what a focus test would potentially be able to offer you, where you got Joe Blogs giving you their opinion about what they're seeing in front of them, but not necessarily wider movements of the industry that a content creator might be tuned into.
Oh, majorly. I mean, I won't name names, but even very recently, we had folks that were like, "Oh, you should watch out for this." It's we never market or sell a game in a vacuum. You're always examined through the lens of what's currently happening around you. You know, Immortals of Aveum is no different. Like, you can read coverage anywhere on the internet, and it's almost impossible to not see an article written where it's like, Ghostwire Tokyo is mentioned, or Forspoken's mentioned. It's like, these are recent, Magic games that have come out. And it's like, oh, and you're the next in the Magic game. And so those are the only other natural reference points. And so you can't market in a vacuum. And so, the content creators on our community council have had a tremendous impact on us. Like one really specific example was very early on, before we had announced the game. We were trying to figure out what kind of genre term we wanted to put on this. Like, I was very adamant that we carve out our own genre niche, because I'm like, while it is a first-person shooter, it's a gun game without guns. You're using magic instead of guns. We haven't seen anything like this in 20 years. And so, it's entire generations of people that don't have, this will be the first time they've ever even experienced anything like this. And that's I get out of bed to work on new IP at this point. Like, that's what motivates me. New, exciting, original stuff. Okay, now how do you label that? Like, what label are you putting on that for people? I remember back on Battleborn and 2K days, like we had coined the term hero shooter with Game Informer magazine when we first announced that game. And I don't think anybody remembers Battleborn as like the hero shooter. They remember Overwatch as the hero shooter because of all the way that those things were marketed side by side. And again, great example of outside factors that within the industry
you can't get away from.
You can't get away from it. It just is, right? But I'll never forget Annie McNamara, who's at EA now, but like, other Game Informer editors, Andrew Reiner, they were like, really, hero shooter? You want us to say that? That's like, not, why? Like, why do you have to give that term? And I was like, somebody has to, we have to provide a shorthand for the industry for this type of game, because no one had seen this type of game before, and none of the other games were announced yet.
Right. Okay.
And so then, of course, as when you look back at the history, it's like, okay, then Overwatch was announced, then like Lawbreakers was announced, like there's so many other games that came out.
And so you've had to do a similar thing.
So hero, so hero shooter became a term eventually. That latched on, but it started on that game Battleborn. And so for this experience, I was like, well, we're now making a new experience where I think we need to coin a term that is going to work. And our first term was really actually like military fantasy shooter.
Okay.
Because we were like, we think it's a fantasy shooter, and it is an interesting version of fantasy. It's a militarized fantasy, medieval fantasy, right? And the council, our creator council, actually cautioned us and said, in the moment you say military, and then I actually see what the game is about, I'm thinking like Modern Warfare military.
Yeah,
like
you're thinking milsim.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's absolutely not even close to what you guys are doing.
And what's fascinating about that is that from your side, it would make total sense, and I get it having played the game now, because so much of the theme of the game is these different factions, these different like massive armies that are all sort of constantly locked in battle with one another. And the military presence there is palpable at almost all times.
Yeah.
You're referring to your general constantly. You're constantly being made aware of where you stand in the chain of command.
Yes.
And all these things are present, but it's also magic. And so
Yeah.
I can understand military seeming like the most obvious choice to make.
Right.
It's just that weirdly the internet has its own sort of definitions and understandings of,
Exactly
okay, you're
right.
going in the military direction. That means something else to me entirely,
Yep.
even though it's still military themed.
100%.
So I guess that's the sort of conversation you would have had in that council.
That's what you did, yeah. And
Yeah.
when you're at a developer or publisher, like you have to, as an outsider, you have to remember, like we're this close to the project, right? It is in front of our nose. You see it so closely that sometimes it's you miss the obvious stuff. And so they were able to point out, like, oh, that's actually just like setting the wrong expectation. And so we got to the heart of the matter. What really mattered to us? Well, we really wanted to make sure we were communicating this as a fantasy game.
Yep.
And so inevitably we were like, well, magic is fantasy. Like you can't have magic and not have fantasy, really. Like, they kind of go hand in hand.
Challenge you to try it.
Someone on the internet will
Figure
prove
it
me
out
wrong,
for us.
no doubt. But eventually that led us down the path to call it a single player first person magic shooter.
Yep.
And once we established now hopefully have established ourselves as we are a single player game. We are a first person shooter game when you obviously see it's from the first person perspective. The goal is to inevitably just be like, we're a magic shooter.
Yep.
Now you understand what that is. And if we're successful, hopefully when we're successful, I could see Immortals of Aveum spawning other developers having ideas of being like, oh, they did it, man. They finally broke the code
Yep.
on how to make magic and first-person combat work. And you could see other magic shooter type clones popping up in this being a permanent, niche subgenre, the way that hero shooters are referred to as that. And it didn't. In 2016, when I did Battleborn, hero shooters was nothing.
Right.
And now hero shooters is a common term.
colloquial name that everyone uses.
100%. So magic shooter could be the new hero shooter. We'll see.
I hope so.
We'll look back in
That'd be fun.
history will judge us on
Yeah,
whether
yeah.
that worked or not. But
So
but my point is
the
that
council, yeah.
the Creator Council helped steer us in that direction.
Yeah, got you. And so that was an engagement that lasted, or is it ongoing?
It's ongoing.
Okay,
Yeah.
got you.
Yeah, yeah.
So you'll have, is it regular check-ins with these folks, or is it sort of as and when you need to have a conversation about a certain thing? Or how does that work?
It's starting to become as and when needed, but early on it was like on a monthly basis, and then
Okay.
as needed. We're all on a Discord server together, so if we need something ad hoc, we're there chatting.
Yeah, that's something that I agree with you that a lot of teams in the industry are doing that sort of thing now, but I don't think that they're doing it in the way that I think EA have often managed to.
Yeah,
EA
EA's
I
very
think
good
have been
at it.
quite ahead of the curve in that regard.
Yep.
And I want to give them credit for that, because I think EA have really done a good job over the years of seeing the writing on the wall with creators and creator input and the potential for that, whether it's been through EA Play,
Yes.
whether it's been through the Game Changers program,
Changers, yep.
or now their creator network. There's clearly been so much focus from them in recognizing creators are so full of all this knowledge about various different bits and pieces. They're such good stewards of a game's community.
Yes.
And how do we open up that value to the developers? I think that it's something that other studios, even though they're beginning to make these efforts, would really do well to take EA's lead and double down on it in a big way, because again, I can't count the number of times I've been talking to creator friends of mine, we've been covering a game together and saying, like, we know that these issues are here,
Yeah.
right? And unlike perhaps some of the viewers that are tweeting or making whatever kind of posts they're making about things being bad and they're really upset, we as creators might have actually spoken to some devs off stream,
Yeah.
off the record, and have a little bit of insight into what's going on there. So we're empathetic to the problems, but there's still not quite the layer of, okay, let's be brought into the studio in an official capacity
Yes.
and try and figure out how we can help you troubleshoot these things that might be going on at any given time.
Yep.
And that goes for pre-launch, that's from when the game is all gray blocks and
Yep.
sort of nothing really makes sense, but you can kind of see a vision and you're not quite at that quality level yet.
Yep.
And it goes all the way through to dealing with the community management after the fact, because you have a release and that's great, but what are you going to do 3 months after? Are you still trying to sell the game? Yeah, of course you are.
Yes.
So you can't drop the ball there, right? And those conversations are only going to evolve further as more people come in and jump in and say, well, I'm a community member now, so I have an opinion.
Yep.
You need to help sort of navigate all of those. And I think creators are a really effective way of doing that. I do always see an argument with this where folks that aren't creators will be like, oh, not the content creators again. Like, not those people that don't have the same opinion as me. But I think they miss, and I like that you brought this up when we first started talking about it, they miss the fact that it isn't just that one content creator that has a different opinion to you, and therefore that's going to be the only voice in the room, and therefore the game is not going to meet your expectations.
Right.
But rather, it's an intentionally curated suite of folks from all over the place so that you can say, okay, well, the hardcore milsim content creators are having one reaction to this, but actually the folks that play much more casually, they play variety games or whatever it might be, and they're less deep in the community and they're spread across more of them, more of a sort of horizontal layout, they're loving it. So we can choose whether we're going to go in that direction more and lean in that direction, or we can say, well, we've got both opinions here. Let's find middle ground that works for both of them. And I think that's a misconception that slowly needs to be broken down. It's definitely not going to happen overnight.
No, but you're right.
The process is ongoing, and the fact that you guys are really intentionally trying to carve out a path forward in that area with EA, I think is really, really beneficial. I have two last questions here that are sort of fun ones, right? So we're going to start off. If you had infinite budget, like budget wasn't an issue, red tape wasn't an issue, it was purely about your sort of creative direction in marketing, right? And there was a new studio that came along, or they've got some kind of product that they're ready to sell, what would be the first couple of things that you would do to say, okay, these are the tentpole foundations you need to build out influencer marketing at the company? Like, what are those things? Is it just straight away jumping on phone calls to understand where the folks in your community are at right now and their careers and what they want? Would you have changed that approach? Now, obviously, the industry has sort of evolved a lot. Is there anything that stands out there that you would say is first port of call to build that department?
For a brand new company?
For a new studio, maybe similar to yourselves, but earlier in the journey, potentially.
Oh, yeah.
Starting out, trying to figure out how do we breach this massive kind of world that we currently don't have sort of expertise in?
It's tricky, and it depends on what kind of game you're making. But fundamentally, I would say, the first and obvious step is actually to take it seriously and understand that it is its own discipline, and it needs at least one person who's just like focused on that.
Yep.
The other thing I would say is, understanding what you want to achieve with your game, what kind of game you're making, and then think about content creators from the beginning. If you're any product, consumer product, game or not, should do this, but especially in games these days. And that's the one thing I haven't had the privilege yet, an experience of actually having been able to do that from the onset of a project. And I'm hoping that we can do that here at Ascendant as time goes on and we work on additional games. But what does that engagement loop look like for our community creators from the beginning of the game's design? There's groups out there, agencies that provide, that are starting to think about this and provide really good suggestions. But it's like, if you don't, especially if you're live service, but even if you're not live service, even if you're a single player game with a 25-hour story and you're going to get, put down on the shelf at some point, in the amount of time that you're for the lifespan of that game, what are content creators incentivized to do to continue to play, to gamify the experience, even a story experience? That has to be considered from the beginning.
Right.
And it needs to be factored into the game's design. And there aren't, some companies are doing this, and they're more live service focused games that are building it from scratch. There's definitely, creators out there, Sacriel and Shroud announced their game company. So there's definitely some creators that are like, okay, no one's doing this, what I'm describing right now, so we're gonna do it ourselves, I think, which I think is awesome.
Yep.
It's super admirable, and I don't think that's gonna slow down, because I think when you look at the macro trend of influencer marketing, it is not new in beauty, in fashion, in health and wellness for content creators to form a following based on their opinion and their philosophies on that topic, and then that creator ends up launching product lines. Right? We have not seen that happening in games, but like Dr. Disrespect and Shroud and Sacriel, like there are groups that are now, they're on the frontier of that, but for gaming content creators. It doesn't have to be just that though. I still think that's great. That should happen. I want that to happen.
Yep.
I want to partner with people that are doing that, but game developers should also be putting that into their thought process.
You can tap that energy in the same way.
Yeah, from the beginning. And in a way that is like non-exploitative, just additive to the fun of the game design that you're already creating, but give them a reason to keep coming back. And I got a small taste of it. Thankfully, we had amazing partners at Gearbox Software when we were working on Borderlands 3. Scott Velasquez, shout out to him, his crew over there, they made the EchoCast Twitch extension, which was like a really good...
I remember talking to Scott about that.
Oh, man. And like, they came to me early on when they wanted to make that extension. Colin Sweet, who's over at Sega now, was, a huge part in that, liaising and understanding, what influencers and creators wanted, and then liaising with Scott on the technical end to figure out and engineer how this thing was going to work. But that thing provided, and we had the stats to prove it. It had like folks that were streaming with that extension turned on had 60% longer watch times on Borderlands 3 than streamers that did not play with that.
My God, that is an insane bump. That's not like, I would, if you'd asked me to guess, I would have said 5% or something.
Yeah, right.
That's wild.
And so like inherent value on that app provided, the extension provided to the streamer and then to the viewer was already there. And then there was a little pop-up of like Claptrap would be like, pre-order the game or like buy the game, and he would pop up, and he was doing his salesy thing. Yeah. That thing also drove like a good amount of sales that people actually clicked through. So
context here, just so people, in case you've not seen this is an extension that you can enable if you're playing and streaming Borderlands 3, and it would allow you to do, basically to break the barrier down a little bit between the content creator doing the stream and the viewer in the chat. So you'd be able to do things, if I recall correctly, like you would have a chest that would be opening in the game itself, and through use of the extension, you could have folks in the chat receiving rewards from your in-game chest. You could also track a bunch of things with it, like for example, there would be different bosses in the game that you might be taking down, and you could track those stats, and you could kind of contain all of that information from the game, and then pull it out of the game and display it in different ways. What loadout you're using at a given time, displaying that in real time, so a viewer can be like, what sort of stats do they have on this gun? And then just click on the extension and it's overlaid over the stream, so the viewer has exactly what they need, but the streamer doesn't need to deviate and show their build for the 50 millionth time.
Yes, exactly.
And so I can understand why that would have been so value additive.
It was such a value add.
Watch longer.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it was that was just an amazingly awesome coincidence that you had smart people ahead of their time at Gearbox Software who were already interested in doing this and had the engineering skills to do it. Like, Scott Velasquez is a streamer himself, understands Twitch, watches a lot of Twitch, understood what streamers and viewers want, and also happens to be like a 20-year veteran who is an engineer and can code. Right. And was like, okay, I'm gonna make an app and an extension that does it. It became the showpiece extension for Twitch. Yeah. And he had already been doing it. When he told me about it, I was like, this is utterly brilliant and amazing. And they managed to get it done, and we integrated it into the demo that we did at the Borderlands 3 reveal event. So, okay, now we have an audience of hundreds of thousands of people watching this reveal, and we are deliberately having 200 plus streamers there streaming the game on our behalf at the event, and they have extension enabled. And the catch was, we were like, all the loot that you get from this, if you like authenticate your Shift account with the extension, all the loot that you earn while watching this stream will just be waiting for you when the game comes out. That was it, yeah. And it was like, oh my God, it was one of those Oprah moments. It's like, in everyone under your seat, you get something. Exactly, yeah. And so, but all of that was just like stars aligned that like we happened to have an influencer group at 2K that could take advantage of this and put on a show like that. And we had people at Gearbox, as the developer, who independently were interested in this and took initiative to build it. And when we both discovered what we were doing, we were like, oh my God, this is amazing. And that has never been replicated again at 2K. This never happened, despite all best efforts to get many other types of things working, Twitch drops, you name it. I mean, there's people there that don't even know what Twitch drops is. And so it's tough. You need the right people who understand it, and that place emphasis on it. So my point is that like, I think that's the advice I would give to anybody at a new studio, is think about how, not just how your game will be played by people, but how your game will be watched by people and engaged with. And because if you can just put a little more thought into your game design and connect those dots, the retention that to speak in business marketing terms, the player retention that you would have, an interest on your game, no matter the genre. It could be a single player game of 8 hours worth of story experience. people will have reasons to replay your 8-hour story.
Yep.
And people have reasons to rewatch your 8-hour story.
Yep.
That's immensely valuable. And from a bottom line business perspective, that's what ends up selling more units, can lead to incremental sale.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, the situation that you sort of end up in as a viewer watching a game that is not good to watch is so unfortunate, because you're sort of sitting there going, I would like to engage with this product in some capacity, but the game is sort of almost purposefully confounding my efforts to do so.
Yes, yeah.
And it's like there's goodwill there that's sort of eroded, because it's like, okay, well maybe I want to find a way to connect with this product, but I just don't have the money to buy it right now.
Yeah.
Maybe I would love to become more familiar with the studio and their output and keep up to date with the story, etc. But for whatever reason, I don't have time to play through the entire thing, or whatever it might be,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
There's so many, and the way I refer to this is, as a developer, you have to really be thinking about lifestyle design of your product, as the sort of term that I've coined for it, where you are looking not only at what the player is going to be doing in a given moment and experiencing in a given moment, but looking at the wider picture and saying, okay, what other touch points can we create, whether it's with transmedia, doing a comic or doing a film or anime or whatever it might be, or just the experience of a viewer cosplaying something from the game, or it's a viewer watching a YouTube video that's a walkthrough, or it's them watching a guide, or whatever it might be. You've got to curate all of those experiences just as you are curating the experience of playing the game beat to beat, moment to moment. And I feel like that's starting to become something that folks are really excited about. They see Riot doing some really cool things and bits and pieces of transmedia, and it's like, oh, there's potential here, but I think that brands, there's need for them to lean into that in order to really unlock some value. And it's something that I've been quietly waiting for a long time, and I'm happy to see that it's sort of surfacing and it's finally tangible and real.
It's getting there. Yeah, it's good. It's going to take some more time, but I think it's inevitable.
Right.
Like, I think this is where it's all kind of heading in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the last question I have for you is just a little fun one. Over the years, obviously, you've had a career at a couple of different companies now and worked with probably upwards of thousands of developers over that time.
Yeah.
Are there any either sort of key mentors in content creation, influence marketing, marketing in general? That is just sort of someone that comes to mind? Obviously, I'm sure it's sort of a massive list of folks, but is there anyone that you think was extremely important on that journey for you as you've kind of figured things out?
I mean, there's been so many in my life over the years. A man named Al Gettler years ago in publishing, he was the publisher of our newspaper group when I was just starting out.
Okay.
Took me under his wing, and he was the type of guy who, just the kindest person, but also empowering, right? Like, here I was, like a 21-year-old kid out of school with big ideas, doing weird designs, like all kinds of weird designs on the front page of newspapers that were unorthodox. And he, instead of shutting that down and saying, this is just a non-traditional way of doing this, embraced it, empowered it. Pretty soon other designers were, replicating it or asking me for how I was doing it. And so, that's to me was like in the earliest of my career was the sign of a good leader.
Right.
So I think, as I have grown up and become a leader myself within the industry, that has stuck with me because it was intrinsic sort of just quality of how to treat people.
Yep.
And so, he's been a big one for me for many years, basically most of my gaming career. Ryan Jones, who's I think he's now the vice president of communications over at Amazon Games. Ryan and I, were like a dynamic duo along with this, with director of communications over at Private Division, Brian Roundy.
Okay.
Three of us were like three amigos and, accomplished so much together. And, Ryan especially showed me what it was like for, to persevere against the corporation that is sort of rigidly stuck in its ways. And together as a group, we integrated, went from being a public relations team to be an integrated communications team, social media department, community management department, and then creator relations kind of all coming under one roof. And so, not only just that and how he managed to do that, but also all of his advice to me over the years of just like how to better present myself as a professional. So that's like the kind of person, I think everyone needs that in their life. Somebody that's just like, hey, you're doing it this way and it kind of rubs people the wrong way. Like maybe just do it a little bit more this way. So
Right,
like,
yeah.
I owe so
Just
much
a little
of
steer in the right direction.
yeah, I owe so much of the polish of my personality and how I conduct myself, I think, to him, and I'm indebted to him for my life and just helping me get my foot in the door in the games industry. He was the guy that hired me at Access Communications back in the day, and then eventually, he went to 2K and ended up hiring me at 2K.
Oh, so great, there you go.
So we've had quite a long career together in the industry, and now we're obviously doing separate things, but I'm always grateful to him for that. And, and then here my story is just still being written, but Spencer Hunt, our COO, guy that's walked many paths in the entertainment industry and the marketing. He's been an executive operations and executive in Hollywood at a big at like Paramount Studios and Skydance Studios and stuff. So he's somebody that every day I learn something new from, and our story is only just getting started. He and I here. And the last thing I'd say, and this is for any creator out there, is find peers. Your mentor doesn't need to be someone who's older and has more experience.
Yep.
I know, I don't know if it's a catchy term or not, but I always talk about mastermind groups of people. I think it's essential that content creators find other content creators that they know and like, and band together to discuss what your challenges are, what your successes are, share knowledge. Don't view other channels as your competitor. Even if you're competing for the same audience, there's differences about your personalities that are going to appeal to different people. Get together and talk about what works and what doesn't work. And that is, I've started to do that in the last 5 years in the influencer space. Mitch Inkrot, I had mentioned earlier, Corey Niblett, who's heads up, he's the COO of Leviathan Core. If any content creator out there in the gaming space wants to work with an amazingly professional agency that represents brands but totally understands creators, Leviathan Core is top tier.
I can vouch for that because I worked with them a few months ago.
And so much of that, George Dupree over there runs that shop and owns the company, but Corey and Colin, are the heart and soul of the creativity and the executions that go into that. And so just being able to bounce ideas off of him and Colin and Mitch, those are people. And then Corey Andres is another one. He and I crossed paths at the end of our career, like sort of crossed our paths at 2K. He's over at 1047 Games now, and he's just another proactive, forward-thinking, progressive guy that just gets content creators. So I would watch out for big things with Splitgate and what 1047 Games is doing. They're very, all the progressive sort of more ambitious ideas that I've shared on our conversation. Like Corey and I have talked about all that stuff ad nauseum and see eye to eye on that. So
yeah, I think it's really the whole mastermind group thing and finding that kind of tribe around you that you can share those sorts of ideas with is clearly, just as much as it's essential for content creators, and I'd echo your advice there, it's clearly something that you're living the reality of. You're practicing what you preach, and whether it's through the podcast at the studio or just having conversations like this and being willing and being open to try and break down some of those barriers and educate the industry in some areas and entertain them in other areas that you might not typically do as a game studio. It's been wonderful talking about it with you.
Yes.
And in the same way that you have looked up to some of those folks for their leadership over the years and their steering over the years, I'm confident that through your efforts and through all of these different programs that you guys are activating right now, there are going to be other folks in the industry that see what you're doing and they are steered by your leadership and your stewardship in that role too. So I just want to say thank you for a fantastic conversation today.
Thank you, yeah.
And I can't wait to chat more and to play the game when it comes out.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure. It's not often I get to just geek out about this stuff for a few hours, so I really appreciate it, man. I think, if anybody wants to learn more about the game or about our company, AscendantStudios.com is probably the best place to go to do that. That's like a hub website for us. You can then find like our Rise Above podcast from there. That's across all major platforms like YouTube and Spotify and Amazon and Apple and all that stuff. And then Immortals of Aveum, obviously, just Google it. You'll find the web. I think it's immortalsofavium.com is the marketing site for that. And find us on all the social platforms. And if you want to follow me, I'm on Twitter, just my first and last name, Scott Pytlik, PYT. So that's it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Game's out July 20th.
July 20th.
And I'm looking forward to it.
All right.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening today. As a reminder, this show is brought to you by Pipeline, the leading creator development platform which helps creators build their audiences and scale their businesses. To learn more about Pipeline and see if it would be a good fit for you as a creator to have your business scaled, simply go to www.pipeline.gg.